I regret ignoring my gut feeling, a life-altering mistake. I regret ignoring my gut feeling, a life-altering mistake. It was an ordinary Tuesday afternoon when everything changed, but the truth is, it all began with a feeling I couldn't shake. The morning had started like any other, sunlight spilling through my curtains, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee wafting through the kitchen, and the usual chaos of getting ready for work. But beneath the normalcy, there was something gnawing at me, a heaviness in the pit of my stomach that I couldn't quite explain. It was the kind of unease that makes your skin prickle and your heart race without reason, but I brushed it off as nothing more than leftover anxiety from a stressful week. As I drove to work, the feeling only intensified. I found myself checking my rearview mirror obsessively, half expecting to see a shadowy figure following me. My hands were slick with sweat on the steering wheel, and I had to consciously remind myself to breathe. The unease stayed with me all through my morning meetings, making my thoughts scatter and my words stumble. My coworker Sarah noticed, her brows knitting together in concern. "You all right?" she asked, her voice gentle. I forced a smile and waved her off. "Yeah, just a weird feeling," I said, laughing awkwardly. She didn't look convinced, but she let it drop, and I wished I hadn't been so dismissive. By lunchtime, the unease had become a full-blown sense of dread. Every fiber of my being screamed that something was wrong, that I needed to get out of the office, away from something. But again, I ignored it. Rationality won out. What could possibly be wrong in the middle of the day, in the middle of a bustling city? Still, I couldn't bring myself to eat, the idea of food turning my stomach. I spent my lunch break staring out the window, watching people go about their lives, oblivious to the storm raging inside me. When my phone buzzed with a text from my mom, asking if I wanted to come by for dinner, I felt a pang of relief. Maybe some family time would calm me down. I promised her I'd be there by 6. The afternoon dragged on, my gut twisting tighter with each passing hour. It wasn't until the drive home that things truly spiraled out of control. Traffic was heavy, the kind of crawl that made every minute feel like an eternity. I was gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles turned white, the oppressive weight in my chest making it hard to breathe. Then, up ahead, I saw the flashing red and blue lights of a police blockade. My heart plummeted as I inched closer, my worst fears materializing before my eyes. A massive accident had occurred, a tangle of crushed metal and shattered glass, and as I strained to see what had happened, the feeling in my gut twisted into a sickening realization. It was a familiar car, crushed beyond recognition, the license plate barely visible but unmistakable. It was my mom's car. Panic washed over me in waves, my hands trembling so violently that I could barely keep the car steady. My ears were ringing, my mind struggling to comprehend what I was seeing. I pulled over to the side of the road, stumbling out of my car as if in a daze. My knees gave out, and I sank onto the gravel, my breath coming in shallow, ragged gasps. Emergency responders were everywhere, their voices muffled and distant, like I was hearing them through a wall of water. I managed to ask one of them, a paramedic with kind but weary eyes, if there had been any survivors. He looked at me, and the pity in his eyes told me everything I needed to know before he even opened his mouth. "I'm sorry," he said, and those 2 words shattered something deep inside me. My mom, the woman who had raised me, who had just texted me hours ago, was gone. The world blurred as grief consumed me, but beneath the sorrow was a burning sense of guilt. I had known, somehow. That gut feeling, the one I had brushed off as anxiety, had been a warning. A warning I hadn't heeded. If I had left work early, if I had listened, maybe I could have stopped her, maybe I could have saved her. The what-ifs and could-haves tormented me, an endless loop of regret. The days that followed were a blur of condolences and funeral arrangements. Friends and family gathered, their sorrowful expressions and whispered words blending into a cacophony of grief. I went through the motions, numb and hollow, but the feeling in my gut never went away. It stayed with me, a constant reminder of the price of ignoring my instincts. I stopped sleeping, haunted by dreams where my mom's face was just out of reach, her voice echoing in the darkness. "Why didn't you listen?" she asked, over and over, until I woke up gasping for air. The worst part was the moments when I almost forgot, when I'd pick up my phone to text her or walk into her house expecting to see her smile. The emptiness that followed those moments was crushing. Weeks passed, and I withdrew from everyone. Work became a distant memory, my once orderly life descending into chaos. I spent hours researching gut feelings, reading about the science behind intuition and how the brain processes danger. It was a futile attempt to make sense of what had happened, to understand why I hadn't listened to the one thing that could have saved her. One night, unable to bear the silence of my apartment any longer, I took a drive. The same route I had taken the day of the accident. The road was dark and empty, the memories lurking in every shadow. I pulled over at the spot where the accident had happened, now marked by a small memorial of flowers and photos left by friends and strangers alike. I got out of the car, the cold night air biting at my skin, and knelt beside the memorial. "I'm so sorry," I whispered, my voice breaking. Tears blurred my vision, and for the first time since the accident, I let myself cry. I wept for the loss, the guilt, and the gut feeling I had ignored. As I sat there, something strange happened. The air grew still, and a warmth enveloped me, a presence so familiar it made my heart ache. I closed my eyes, and for a fleeting moment, I could almost feel my mom's hand on my shoulder, her voice whispering, "It's not your fault." The warmth lingered, comforting and bittersweet, and then it was gone, leaving me shivering in the cold once more. But something had shifted. The regret would never leave me, and the guilt would never fully fade, but I realized then that my mom wouldn't want me to be trapped in that cycle of blame. I had made a mistake, one that had cost me dearly, but I was still here. I had to honor her memory by living, by finding a way to forgive myself, even if it felt impossible. As I drove home that night, the feeling in my gut was quiet, not the suffocating dread I had grown used to, but a gentle, guiding presence. I didn't know what lay ahead, but I promised myself that I would never ignore my instincts again, that I would trust the whispers of intuition that had once tried to save me. It wouldn't bring her back, but maybe, just maybe, it could bring me a sense of peace one day. The day my pet taught me an important lesson. The day my pet taught me an important lesson. When I first got Chester, a scrappy little terrier mix with a knack for finding trouble, I had no idea how much my life was going to change. Chester was supposed to be a companion, something to keep me company in my small, creaky apartment. But it turned out that Chester was much more than a loyal pet, he was the best friend I'd ever had. He was quirky, with an intense look in his eyes that always seemed to know more than he let on. He had this way of staring at me like he was trying to communicate something I could never quite understand, like there was a secret he was desperate to share. I never thought much of it until that day, the day I realized Chester had been trying to teach me something all along. It started out like any other morning, the soft light creeping in through the window, illuminating the dust in the air, the quiet hum of the city outside. Chester was unusually restless, pacing around the room, sniffing the air with a strange intensity. I figured he'd heard something, a car backfiring, someone moving furniture in the apartment next door, but the way he looked at me was different. There was urgency in his eyes, almost a sense of fear, like he was trying to tell me something was wrong. I brushed it off, distracted by my own morning routine. But Chester wouldn't let up. He kept pacing, barking in short, sharp bursts that echoed through the quiet apartment. I knelt down, tried to calm him, but he was inconsolable, pulling at the hem of my pants with his teeth, tugging me toward the door with more force than I'd ever seen in him before. I tried to laugh it off, but there was something unsettling about it, something in the way he wouldn't look away, his eyes wide and pleading. All right, I sighed, grabbing his leash. Maybe he just needed some fresh air, I thought. I opened the door, and he shot out into the hallway, his little paws echoing on the floor, his body tense and ready. But as I followed him outside, I noticed something strange. The street was empty, unnaturally quiet for this time of day. There was an eerie stillness, the usual bustle and noise gone, replaced by an oppressive silence that made the hairs on my arms stand up. Chester tugged me down the street, pulling with a determination that I'd never seen before, guiding me down alleyways and side streets that I'd never taken. My heart started to race as I realized we were heading toward the old abandoned house at the edge of town, the one everyone said was haunted, the one parents warned their kids about. I'd never been near it before, never had a reason to, but now Chester seemed intent on leading me there, his nose low to the ground, his tail held high like he was on a mission. We reached the house, its windows dark and empty, the paint peeling off the walls like dead skin. Chester scratched at the door, whimpering softly, and I felt a chill run down my spine. I wanted to turn back, to take him home, but something held me there, some unspoken bond between us that compelled me to trust him. I opened the door, the old wood creaking beneath my fingers, and we stepped inside. The air was thick with dust, the smell of decay hanging heavy in the air. Chester led me through the dark, empty rooms, his paws silent on the floorboards as he guided me deeper into the house. I felt a growing unease, a sense of dread that built with each step, but I couldn't stop. Chester was on a mission, and I was trapped in his wake, following him down a hallway that seemed to stretch on forever. Finally, we reached a door at the end of the hall, its surface scarred and battered, like someone had tried to claw their way through. Chester stopped, his eyes fixed on the door, his body tense and alert. He turned to me, and in that moment, I saw something in his eyes that I'd never seen before, a warning, a plea. I swallowed, my hand shaking as I reached for the doorknob. The door creaked open, revealing a small, dimly lit room, empty except for a single, old chair in the center. The air was cold, colder than it had any right to be, and I felt a shiver run down my spine. Chester stepped forward, his gaze fixed on the chair, and I realized he was trembling, his body tense with fear. I followed his gaze, and that's when I saw it, a faint, shadowy figure, barely visible, sitting in the chair, its head tilted toward us in a silent, unseeing gaze. My heart pounded in my chest as I stumbled backward, my mind struggling to make sense of what I was seeing. The figure didn't move, didn't speak, but I could feel its presence, feel its cold, empty gaze boring into me. Chester let out a low growl, his hackles raised, his body pressed against my leg as if to protect me. I didn't understand, didn't know what he was trying to tell me, but I could feel his fear, feel his desperation to get me out of that room. I turned to leave, pulling Chester with me, but as I stepped into the hallway, I heard a voice, soft and whispery, like the wind passing through dead leaves. "You shouldn't have come here," it said, and I felt a chill settle over me, a coldness that seeped into my bones. I ran, pulling Chester along with me, my heart racing as we stumbled down the stairs and out into the blinding light of day. I didn't stop until we were back at home, safe within the familiar walls of our apartment, the quiet hum of the city outside a comforting reminder of normalcy. But Chester was different, quieter, more subdued. He didn't look at me the same way, didn't have that playful spark in his eyes. It was like something had changed between us, like he'd seen something I couldn't understand, something he could never unsee. For days, I tried to put it out of my mind, tried to convince myself that it was all a bad dream, a figment of my imagination. But every night, as I lay in bed, I could feel that cold gaze, that whisper of warning echoing in my mind. Chester stayed close to me, always watching, always alert, as if he knew that something had followed us back, something that was waiting, lurking in the shadows. And then, one night, I woke up to find him standing at the foot of the bed, his eyes fixed on something in the corner of the room, something I couldn't see. He let out a low growl, his body tense, his gaze unwavering. I sat up, my heart pounding, but there was nothing there, nothing but shadows and silence. Chester looked at me, his eyes filled with a sadness I couldn't explain, a sadness that seemed to say goodbye. The next morning, he was gone. I searched everywhere, calling his name, tearing the apartment apart in a desperate frenzy, but he was nowhere to be found. It was like he'd vanished, like he'd been taken by something I couldn't understand. Days turned into weeks, and I tried to move on, tried to accept that Chester was gone. But every night, I could feel that cold presence, feel that whisper of warning echoing in my mind. And every night, I wondered if he'd left to protect me, if he'd sacrificed himself to keep me safe from something I couldn't see, something I couldn't fight. I don't know where he is, don't know if he's still out there, watching over me from some place beyond my understanding. But I know that he taught me an important lesson that day, that there are things in this world that we can't see, things that linger in the shadows, waiting, watching, and that sometimes, the ones we love will do anything to protect us from the darkness, even if it means leaving us behind. My friend stole my baby name, now she wants me to change mine. I had always dreamed of having a daughter and naming her something special, something unique that held deep meaning. When my best friend Sarah and I first discussed baby names years ago, we both casually mentioned our favorites, and I revealed mine, Aveline, a name I had loved since childhood. It felt enchanting, a blend of beauty and strength, just like I hoped my future daughter would be. Fast forward a few years, and I found out I was pregnant. The news was exhilarating, and I couldn't wait to share it with everyone, especially Sarah. I called her immediately, ecstatic, telling her about my pregnancy and the name I had chosen. Sarah sounded genuinely happy for me, and we spent hours discussing baby preparations, my nursery ideas, and how we would support each other through motherhood. Then, just a few months later, I received a text from Sarah. She had just given birth to a beautiful baby girl. My heart soared for her, but when I saw the name she had chosen, my stomach dropped. It was Aveline. I couldn't believe it. I felt like my heart had been ripped out of my chest. I was devastated. How could she take my baby name? I had told her my choice in confidence, and now she had gone and used it for her own child. It felt like a betrayal, and I struggled to process my emotions. I was happy for Sarah but felt anger bubbling beneath the surface. How could she do this to me? When I confronted her about it, she laughed it off, insisting it was a coincidence. It's such a beautiful name, how could I resist? She said, brushing aside my hurt feelings. I tried to remain composed, but inside, I was seething. I couldn't let her get away with this. I spent nights crying into my pillow, wondering if I should still name my daughter Aveline or come up with something else entirely. A part of me felt like I should abandon the name to avoid conflict, but another part felt like I was giving in to Sarah's inconsideration. I eventually decided I would keep the name Aveline because it was special to me, regardless of her decision. The weeks passed, and my due date approached. I was excited yet nervous, thinking about how things would unfold with Sarah after my daughter was born. Would she resent me for keeping the name? Would it ruin our friendship? These thoughts haunted me, but I tried to focus on my pregnancy and preparing for the big day. Then, the day finally came. I gave birth to a healthy, beautiful baby girl, and when they handed her to me, I felt a rush of love I had never known before. As I held her, I whispered, "Welcome to the world, Aveline." Just a few hours later, Sarah arrived at the hospital, her baby in her arms, beaming with pride. The moment she saw my daughter's name on the board, her smile faltered. "Oh, so you really went with Aveline?" she said, her tone a mix of surprise and disapproval. "I thought we could talk about this before you decided." I felt my heart race. "Talk about what?" "I've been telling you since I was pregnant that Aveline was my choice," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. She rolled her eyes. "But you know I wanted to keep the name for my daughter. I thought we could share it." "Share it? You can't just take a name and expect me to give it up because you used it first," I snapped, feeling the anger boiling over. Sarah's eyes narrowed, and I could see the tension building between us. "It's not fair to me. Why can't you just change your mind?" "It's not too late," she demanded, and I couldn't believe what I was hearing. How could she have the audacity to ask me to change my daughter's name after she had taken it from me? "You can't be serious right now," I said, my voice trembling with disbelief. "You took my name. You can't just decide I should change it to make you comfortable." She huffed and crossed her arms, refusing to back down. "It'll just cause drama between our families if we both have daughters with the same name. Think about it." I shook my head, feeling the tears prick at my eyes. "I can't believe you would ask me to do this. Aveline is my baby's name, and I'm not changing it for you." She scoffed, "You're being selfish. This isn't just about you, it's about our friendship." My heart sank. This wasn't about friendship, it was about Sarah's desire to feel like she had the right to dictate my choices. I turned away from her, shaking with anger and frustration. "Get out," I said, my voice firm. "You need to leave." She paused, looking hurt, and for a moment, I felt guilty. But that guilt was quickly overshadowed by my resolve. I wasn't going to let her walk all over me anymore. After that day, things got tense. I returned home with Aveline, and Sarah sent me countless texts, pleading with me to reconsider, to be reasonable. I ignored her. I was too hurt to engage. My daughter was my priority, and I needed to focus on her, not Sarah's drama. Days turned into weeks, and I settled into motherhood. But the tension with Sarah lingered like a storm cloud overhead. I kept my distance, choosing not to engage with her on social media or answer her texts. The drama escalated when she decided to throw a birthday party for her daughter. I was hesitant to attend, but I knew I needed to be civil, for the sake of our friendship. When I arrived, the atmosphere was charged with unspoken tension. Sarah greeted me with a forced smile, but I could feel the animosity simmering beneath the surface. As the party progressed, I watched as she introduced her daughter, who was also named Aveline, to the guests, and the awkwardness was palpable. Guests were confused and whispered among themselves about the shared name, and I felt my heart pound in my chest. I was furious. Later in the day, while the kids played, I overheard Sarah talking to another friend. "I can't believe she didn't change the name. It's so inconsiderate," she said, and I felt my blood boil. I couldn't let this go on. I approached her, my heart racing. "You need to stop talking about me behind my back, Sarah. If you have a problem with my choice, say it to my face," I said, my voice steady despite my nerves. Her eyes widened, surprise flashing across her face. "I wasn't talking about you," she exclaimed, but I could see the guilt in her expression. "You have no right to demand I change my daughter's name after you took it from me," I continued, my voice rising. "You are ruining our friendship over something that should be a joyful occasion." "It's just a name," she shouted back, and I felt a wave of disbelief wash over me. "It's not just a name. It's my daughter's identity. You can't just dismiss that." "You're being dramatic," she said dismissively, but I could see the cracks forming in her facade. The guests around us had gone quiet, sensing the growing tension. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to remain calm. "You have to understand, this isn't just about names. It's about respect. I respected your choice to name your child, but you didn't respect mine. And that hurts more than anything," I said, my voice softening. Her expression shifted, and I could see the realization hitting her. "I didn't mean to hurt you. I thought we could share it. I didn't think it would come to this," she admitted, her voice trembling. I could feel the anger dissipating as I looked at her, my best friend who had turned into a rival overnight. "I want us to be okay, but I can't compromise on this. Aveline is my daughter, and I want her to feel proud of her name," I replied, my heart aching at the distance that had grown between us. Sarah took a step back, her eyes downcast. "I'm sorry. I didn't think it through," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know I messed up." It felt like a small victory, but it was a step toward healing. "I think we need some space to figure this out," I suggested, my voice calm. "I hope you can understand that." She nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. "I do. I'm sorry." As the party continued, the atmosphere began to shift. I saw Sarah interacting with other guests, but the tension was still there, lingering in the air. Over the following weeks, I focused on Aveline and healing from the hurt of our friendship. Sarah sent me messages, trying to reach out and apologize, but I felt it was best to take time apart. Then, one day, I received a letter in the mail from her. It was heartfelt, filled with apologies and an understanding of the pain she caused. She expressed her wish to meet and talk things through, and I felt a glimmer of hope. We agreed to meet at a local park, our favorite spot. As I approached, I saw her sitting on a bench, looking anxious. I took a seat beside her, and we both sighed simultaneously. "I've missed you," she said softly, and I felt a wave of nostalgia wash over me. "I've missed us too," I replied, my heart ached for the friendship we once had. We spent hours talking, opening up about our feelings and the strange encounter that changed my view on life. The strange encounter that changed my view on life. It all began on a night like any other, one of those evenings where the weight of a long day pressed heavy on my shoulders, and all I wanted was the comfort of my bed. The drive home was uneventful until I decided to take a detour, one that cut through the edge of the woods lining the outskirts of town. It was an old habit from my high school days, driving that winding, desolate road just to feel a bit of solitude and peace. The sky was clear, with the moon casting pale silver shadows across the forest, making everything seem sharper, more defined. I turned down my music to hear the soothing hum of the car engine, when suddenly, out of nowhere, the air felt charged, like the moment before a lightning strike. My hands tightened on the steering wheel as my headlights illuminated a figure standing right in the middle of the road. I slammed on the brakes, the tires screeching in protest, and came to a skidding stop just feet away from them. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely breathe. The figure didn't flinch or step back, just stood there, staring at me. My headlights revealed a man in a black coat, his face obscured by the shadow of a wide-brimmed hat. There was something unsettling about him, an aura that seemed to make the night itself colder. I lowered the window a crack, adrenaline still coursing through my veins. "Hey, are you all right?" I called out, my voice more unsteady than I'd like to admit. The man slowly lifted his head, and that's when I noticed his eyes. They reflected the light like an animal's, gleaming with an unnatural luminescence. Every instinct I had screamed at me to get out of there, but curiosity kept me rooted in place. He finally spoke, his voice soft and oddly melodic, a tone that seemed to vibrate deep in my chest. "You've come to a crossroads," he said, his words hanging in the air with an eerie resonance. "Tonight, you must choose." I stared at him, confused and terrified. "Choose what?" I demanded, trying to sound braver than I felt. He didn't answer, just tilted his head slightly, as if listening to something I couldn't hear. The air around us felt thick, oppressive, and the silence that followed was so absolute that I could hear my own rapid heartbeat. He took a step closer, and the world seemed to tilt, the forest around us warping and blurring as if I were suddenly seeing everything through the bottom of a glass. My car felt like a fragile bubble of safety, but it also felt like a cage, trapping me there in that moment. The man lifted one gloved hand and pointed to the woods on my left. "That path leads to knowledge," he said. Then he turned and gestured to the road ahead, the one that led home. "This path leads to peace." A chill ran down my spine, and I found myself shaking my head. "What are you talking about?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. He dropped his hand, and I felt a sudden wave of clarity, as if he had somehow unlocked something in my mind. Images began to flash before me, not memories, but glimpses of possibilities. I saw myself years from now, leading a simple, happy life, filled with warmth and family and laughter. Then I saw an alternate path, one where I was consumed by a relentless search for answers, driven to understand things that no human should ever know. The man was offering me a choice, a future shaped by knowledge or one shaped by peace. It felt absurd, unreal, but every fiber of my being knew this was real, that this choice would shape the rest of my life. "Why me?" I asked, my voice breaking. The man's glowing eyes met mine, and there was something almost sorrowful in his gaze. "Because you are at the crossroads," he said simply. My mind spun, torn between the promises each path seemed to hold. Knowledge had always been something I craved. I wanted to know the secrets of the universe, to unravel the mysteries that plagued humanity. But peace, the thought of a life unburdened by questions I couldn't answer, was alluring in a way I hadn't expected. As I sat there, struggling with my decision, the forest seemed to hold its breath. Time felt suspended, waiting for me to act. Finally, I made my choice. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of it settle in my chest, and told him what I wanted. The man nodded once, solemnly, as if he already knew. "It is done," he said, and then he was gone. No flash of light, no puff of smoke, just gone, as if he had never been there at all. The air lightened, the oppressive weight lifted, and I realized I was gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. I took a shuddering breath and looked around. The road was empty, and the forest was just a forest again, quiet and still under the moonlight. I drove home in a daze, the encounter playing over and over in my mind. For days, I wondered if it had really happened or if I had imagined the whole thing. But then, strange things began to happen. If I had chosen knowledge, I found myself haunted by truths that no one else could see, plagued by visions and realizations that made the world seem darker, more complex than I ever could have imagined. If I had chosen peace, I found a sudden calm settling into my life, opportunities falling into place effortlessly, a gentle sense of purpose guiding me. I realized that whichever path I had chosen was now shaping my reality, and there was no going back. The encounter had changed me, left me with a sense that the world was far more mysterious than I had ever imagined. I'd been given a glimpse of the power of choice, the impact of a single moment, and it left me humbled, grateful, and, at times, terrified. I'll never forget that strange encounter, the man with eyes that shone like stars, and the crossroads that forever altered the course of my life. It made me question everything I thought I knew and filled me with a deep respect for the unknown, for the choices we make, and for the paths we walk, whether we understand them or not. The truth about my best friend's mysterious behavior. The truth about my best friend's mysterious behavior started as a small worry in the back of my mind, a tickle of concern that I could almost ignore, but by the time it really came to the surface, it had twisted itself into something bigger, something I couldn't shake off no matter how hard I tried. My best friend, Alex, had always been a little quirky, but that was part of what I loved about him. He was the kind of person who could make anyone laugh at the drop of a hat, the guy who showed up at your door with pizza when you were having a bad day, and the friend who would drive across town at 2 in the morning if you needed someone to talk to. But a few months ago, something in him changed. It started small. He'd cancel plans out of nowhere, his usually warm texts growing short and curt. At first, I brushed it off, assuming he was just busy with work or stressed about something he wasn't ready to talk about. But then he started disappearing for days on end, ignoring my messages and phone calls, and when he did finally resurface, he looked different. Gaunt, tired, like he hadn't slept in days. He'd shrug it off with a weak smile, claiming he'd just been caught up in things, but there was a strange look in his eyes, something hollow that didn't belong to the Alex I knew. One night, when he finally agreed to meet up, I decided to confront him. He looked worse than ever, dark circles under his eyes, his usually well-groomed appearance replaced by a scruffy, unkempt look, and I could tell he was nervous, his eyes darting around the room like he was afraid someone would overhear us. I asked him point-blank what was going on, if he was in some kind of trouble, but he just laughed it off, saying I was being paranoid. But then he leaned forward and whispered, "I can't tell you, okay? It's not safe. For either of us." That should have been my cue to leave it alone, to respect his privacy, but I couldn't let it go. I started noticing strange things after that, things I might have dismissed before, but now they all felt connected. I'd see him wandering around at odd hours, his movements stiff and mechanical, like he was being controlled by something else. Once, I even caught him standing in front of my apartment building at 3 in the morning, just staring up at my window with a blank, unseeing expression on his face. When I confronted him about it the next day, he acted like he had no memory of it, shrugging it off with an awkward laugh. Then I started getting these weird messages, anonymous texts that felt like warnings, telling me to stay away from him and that I didn't know what I was getting into. But I couldn't stay away, couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply, horribly wrong with my friend, and that whatever he was mixed up in was darker than anything I could imagine. The breaking point came when I got a call from Alex's mom. She told me he'd been acting strange at home too, that he'd lock himself in his room for days on end, only coming out to grab food in the middle of the night. She was terrified, saying she'd caught him talking to himself in his room, arguing with someone who wasn't there. Desperate for answers, I decided to follow him one night, trailing him to an abandoned building on the outskirts of town. I watched as he slipped inside, his movements jerky and unnatural, like he was fighting against something unseen. I waited for what felt like hours before he finally emerged, his eyes blank and his face expressionless. But then he saw me. His face twisted in horror, and he grabbed me, his grip vice-like as he whispered, "You shouldn't be here. They're watching." He wouldn't tell me who they were, only that they had control over him, that he was bound to them in ways I couldn't understand. That night, he begged me to leave him alone, to pretend we'd never met, and though every instinct in me screamed to help him, I could see the desperation in his eyes. It was like he knew there was no way out, like he'd already accepted his fate. I left him there, feeling sick with guilt, but I couldn't bring myself to forget him, not when every corner of my apartment seemed to hold reminders of our friendship, of the person he used to be. Days turned into weeks, and I didn't see him, didn't hear from him, and I started to wonder if maybe he'd found a way to escape. But then, one night, I woke up to find him standing at the foot of my bed, his face pale and his eyes empty, like he was barely human anymore. He reached out to me, his voice barely a whisper as he said, "They're here. They're coming for you too." And then he was gone, disappearing into the darkness before I could even scream. I haven't seen him since, but sometimes, late at night, I hear footsteps outside my door, feel eyes watching me from the shadows, and I know that whatever had him hasn't forgotten about me. I can't sleep anymore, can't shake the feeling that one day, I'll wake up with that same empty look in my eyes, that I'll become just another puppet for whatever dark force claimed my best friend. I tried to warn people, tried to tell his family, his friends, but they all looked at me like I was crazy, like I'd finally cracked under the pressure. But I know the truth. I know they're out there, watching, waiting, and I can feel them getting closer every day. The day my life changed forever after a single decision. The day my life changed forever after a single decision. I didn't think much of it at the time, it was just a small choice, something that seemed almost insignificant, something people do every day without a second thought. It was a late autumn afternoon, one of those gloomy days where the sun barely breaks through the clouds and everything feels a little surreal, a little too quiet. I'd just gotten off work, the stress of the day pressing down on me, the usual parade of meetings, emails, and endless deadlines buzzing in my head. I was exhausted, hungry, and ready to go home and lose myself in a quiet evening. As I walked to my car, I noticed an older man standing just outside the parking lot, a weary look on his face, holding a piece of paper in his hand. He looked lost, out of place in his ragged clothes and faded baseball cap, his hands trembling as he glanced around like he was trying to find something or someone. Part of me wanted to just keep walking, to pretend I hadn't seen him and go home to unwind. But something tugged at me, a nagging feeling I couldn't shake, telling me to stop, to at least ask if he needed help. I'd heard enough horror stories to know that approaching strangers alone wasn't always the smartest move, especially after dark, but this man looked genuinely helpless. So I made the choice, the one decision that would change everything. I approached him and asked if he needed help finding something. He looked up at me with a mixture of surprise and relief, his voice shaky as he explained that he was trying to find a hospital nearby. His daughter had just been in an accident, he said, and he'd rushed over as soon as he heard, but he'd gotten lost along the way. He showed me the piece of paper with an address scribbled on it, but I recognized immediately that the hospital he was looking for was across town, at least a half-hour drive. He didn't have a phone, or a GPS, and I could see he was too frail to make the trip alone, let alone in the emotional state he was in. I hesitated, the logical part of me screaming that it was a bad idea, that I should call someone else to help him, maybe a taxi or the police, but he looked so defeated, so desperate, that I couldn't bring myself to walk away. I told him I'd take him to the hospital. We drove in silence, the quiet punctuated only by the occasional sniffle from him as he stared out the window, lost in worry. I could feel the tension, the heavy weight of his fear filling the car. When we finally arrived at the hospital, he thanked me, his voice thick with gratitude, and hurried inside. I sat there for a moment, unsure if I should leave or wait to see if he needed anything else. I decided to wait, reasoning that he might need a ride home or some kind of support. An hour passed, then two, and just as I was about to leave, he returned, looking even more distraught than before. He explained that his daughter's condition had taken a turn for the worse and that he didn't know anyone else in the area, that he felt completely alone. My heart went out to him, and I knew then that I couldn't just abandon him. I offered to stay with him, to wait until he knew more. The hours blurred together as we sat in that hospital waiting room, trading stories to pass the time, talking about everything and nothing. He told me about his daughter, how she was the light of his life, how he'd never imagined he'd be sitting here, not knowing if she'd make it. I shared some stories from my own life, trying to distract him, to give him a moment of peace in the midst of his turmoil. It was close to dawn when a doctor finally came out to speak with him. I watched as his face crumbled, as he sank into a chair, the weight of the news hitting him like a physical blow. She hadn't made it. I didn't know what to say, how to offer comfort to a man who'd just lost everything. I stayed with him as he made arrangements, as he tried to come to terms with the reality of his loss. Eventually, he thanked me again, this time with tears in his eyes, and told me that he didn't know what he would have done if I hadn't been there. I went home feeling raw, my mind racing with everything that had happened, every detail etched into my memory. I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd been meant to help him, that fate had somehow pushed me to make that one choice, to be there for a stranger in his darkest hour. Days turned into weeks, and life slowly returned to normal. But I felt different, changed by that single night, by that decision to stop and help when I could have walked away. Then, one day, I received a letter in the mail from the man. Inside was a small note, thanking me once again, telling me that his daughter had always believed in acts of kindness, in the idea that we're all connected, that one small act can make a world of difference. Along with the note was a check, a large sum of money he'd insisted on giving me as a token of his gratitude. I didn't want to accept it, but there was something in his words, in his belief in the goodness of people, that made me realize how deeply he'd been affected by that night. I kept the check, but instead of spending it, I used it to start a small foundation in his daughter's name, dedicated to helping people in need, to offering support in those unexpected moments when life changes in an instant. The foundation grew over time, each new person we helped becoming part of the legacy that had started with a single decision, a single choice to help someone in need. Looking back now, I can't help but wonder how different my life would be if I'd ignored that man, if I'd gone home that night and forgotten all about him. That single decision led to so much more than I could have ever imagined, to a purpose I never would have found otherwise. It changed my life in ways I can't fully explain, leaving me with a sense of connection, of meaning, that goes beyond anything I'd felt before. And all Because of one choice, one moment of kindness, one night that turned into something far greater than I could have ever anticipated. My boss expects me to work on my wedding day. Should I quit? It all started as a dream job, a position I had worked tirelessly to secure. The thrill of working in a fast-paced marketing agency was intoxicating, and I poured my heart and soul into every project. But as my wedding day approached, everything began to unravel. My fiancé, Jake, and I had spent months planning the perfect ceremony, poring over every detail, and visualizing the day we would finally say I do. I was ecstatic, ready to celebrate the love we had built together. However, just 2 weeks before the big day, I received a chilling email from my boss, Kelly. It was a reminder about an important client meeting scheduled for the same day as my wedding. My stomach dropped. I was hopeful that it was just a misunderstanding, so I replied, politely requesting to reschedule. But when I approached Kelly in person, I was met with a steely gaze. "You're the lead on this project. We can't afford to lose momentum, especially with this client," she said. "You have to be there." I felt the walls closing in. "But it's my wedding day, Kelly. I can't just cancel or push it back. It's important to me and my family." Her expression didn't change. "I understand, but this is a crucial time for our company. You can't let your personal life interfere with your work responsibilities." The weight of her words hung in the air, and I felt a mixture of frustration and helplessness. I had always been committed to my job, often going above and beyond. But this felt different. This was my wedding, a once-in-a-lifetime event, and I couldn't wrap my head around the idea of having to choose between my career and my personal happiness. I went home that night, feeling utterly defeated. I tried to talk to Jake about it, hoping he would support me. But when I explained the situation, his brow furrowed with concern. "This isn't just a job, honey. You love what you do, and I know how hard you've worked for this position. Maybe it's worth considering," what Kelly said. I couldn't believe my ears. "You think I should skip my wedding for a client meeting? Jake, this is our day. I've dreamed about it since I was a little girl," he sighed, rubbing his temples. "I'm not saying that. But you don't want to burn bridges either. Can't you find a way to make it work?" I felt torn, the pressure of expectations weighing heavily on my shoulders. I spent the next few days in turmoil, trying to find a solution. I reached out to colleagues for advice, hoping someone would have a suggestion that could help me navigate this mess. But everyone seemed to echo the same sentiment: you can't risk your career over one day. It felt like a betrayal, and I began to question the loyalty of my coworkers. Each day that passed brought more anxiety, and I found myself constantly refreshing my email, waiting for any sign of understanding from Kelly. The day before the wedding, I decided to go in early, hoping to catch Kelly and explain my side one last time. The office was eerily quiet, and I could feel the tension in the air as I approached her office. When I knocked, she looked up from her computer, a mixture of surprise and irritation crossing her face. "What is it, Jenna?" I took a deep breath, trying to keep my composure. "I just wanted to ask if there's any way we can reschedule the meeting. I understand the importance, but it's my wedding day, and I really can't miss it," Kelly sighed, her patience wearing thin. "I've told you before, this is non-negotiable. You need to put your priorities straight. This is a pivotal moment for our company, and I expect you to act accordingly." I felt my heart sink. "I can't believe you're saying this. You're really going to make me choose between my job and my wedding?" She shrugged, completely unfazed. "You've made your choice by being here. Just know that if you're not there, it will reflect poorly on you." I stormed out of her office, a mix of anger and despair swirling inside me. I had been pushed to the limit, and I felt betrayed by a company I had devoted myself to. When I got home, I couldn't hold back the tears. "What am I going to do?" I sobbed, and Jake pulled me into a comforting embrace. "You have to stand up for yourself, Jenna. You can't let them dictate your life." His words ignited a fire within me. I was tired of feeling like a puppet on strings, forced to dance to the whims of someone else's expectations. That night, I made a decision. I didn't want to live with the regret of sacrificing my happiness for a job that wouldn't hesitate to replace me. I drafted my resignation letter, pouring my heart into it. I explained that I loved my job but couldn't compromise my personal life for the sake of a client meeting. I felt a sense of empowerment wash over me as I clicked send. The next morning, I woke up feeling lighter, but also nervous about the repercussions. I still had to face Kelly, and I couldn't shake the anxiety of what would happen next. As I arrived at the office, I steeled myself for the confrontation. Kelly's expression was one of fury as I walked into her office, the resignation email still fresh in her inbox. "You think you can just walk away like this?" she snapped. "You're making a huge mistake." I took a deep breath, trying to maintain my composure. "No, I'm making the right choice for myself. I won't sacrifice my wedding day for a meeting." She leaned forward, her voice low and threatening. "You'll regret this. Do you really think you can find a job that respects your priorities? You're going to be labeled as unreliable." I stood my ground, feeling a sense of clarity. I'd rather be unemployed than work for someone who doesn't value my personal life. I want to live my life on my own terms. Her face reddened in anger, but I turned on my heel and left her office, a sense of finality in my decision echoing in my heart. The moment I stepped outside, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I was free. I spent the next few days finalizing wedding details, soaking in the joy and excitement. On the day of the wedding, as I stood in my gown, surrounded by family and friends, I felt a profound sense of happiness. Jake looked at me with so much love, and in that moment, I knew I had made the right choice. We exchanged vows, pledging our lives to each other, and every worry about work faded into the background. I had taken a stand for myself and chosen love over corporate expectations. In the weeks that followed, I started a new chapter in my career, one that aligned with my values and priorities. I found a job that appreciated my contributions and recognized the importance of work-life balance. Looking back, I realized that sometimes, the hardest choices lead to the most rewarding outcomes. If you're reading this and find yourself in a similar situation, remember, your happiness and personal life should never take a backseat to someone else's expectations. Always prioritize what matters most, and never be afraid to stand up for yourself, even if it means making tough decisions. How a misunderstanding led to a major life change. How a misunderstanding led to a major life change. It all started with one small, innocent mistake, the kind you laugh about later, or at least, that's what I thought. It was late on a Thursday night, and I was exhausted, mindlessly scrolling through my emails when I saw one with an unfamiliar sender name. It looked important, something from a job recruiter I'd spoken to months ago but had never heard back from. The subject line read, "Urgent, last chance for your offer." My heart skipped a beat. My current job was okay, but I'd always dreamed of moving on to something bigger, more challenging. I'd almost forgotten about applying for this job. The waiting period had stretched on so long that I'd just assumed they'd gone with someone else. But here it was, a second chance, seemingly dropped into my lap at the exact moment I was feeling stuck. I opened the email and, without even taking a breath, scanned through it. It congratulated me on my supposed acceptance into the position, though it did mention that I had to respond by the end of the week to confirm my interest. It was already Thursday night. I panicked, glancing at the clock, realizing I barely had any time left. I shot off a quick response, heart pounding, trying to sound professional despite my excitement, and hit send. My thoughts immediately filled with plans for what was next, leaving my current job, packing up, moving to a new city. It was impulsive, yes, but something inside me told me this was right. The opportunity was too perfect to pass up. The next morning, I got a reply from the recruiter. Her tone was warm but slightly confused. She thanked me for my interest, but then mentioned something strange. "Just to confirm, you're interested in continuing your work as a crisis counselor in the rehabilitation program, correct?" My blood ran cold. Crisis counselor. Rehabilitation program? I'd applied for a marketing position. Something about this didn't add up. Frantically, I went back to reread the email chain, realizing in horror that I'd misunderstood the offer entirely. This wasn't a corporate job, it was an opening at a rural rehabilitation center, the kind of place I'd never even considered working. My stomach dropped, panic rising as I considered my options. I'd already quit my job, and if I backed out now, I'd have nothing. Yet the thought of working in a field I knew nothing about, helping people in situations I wasn't trained for, terrified me. But something inside me whispered that maybe this was meant to happen, a twist of fate urging me to take a path I'd never dared to explore. Feeling trapped, I decided to at least visit the center, thinking that maybe I could explain the situation and back out gracefully. I made the drive out to the location they'd listed, miles away from the bustling city I knew, deep into the woods, where the landscape turned quieter, more isolated. When I arrived, I was greeted by a kind older woman, named Ellen, who mistook my hesitant expression for first-day nerves and gave me a reassuring pat on the back. There was something so comforting about her presence, something that made it hard to tell her the truth. She led me inside, introducing me to the staff, all of whom greeted me warmly. They seemed so genuine, so eager to welcome someone they believed was here to make a difference. I felt a pang of guilt, realizing that these people were counting on me, seeing something in me that I didn't even see in myself. Before I knew it, they'd handed me a uniform, set me up in a small on-site cabin, and I found myself unpacking, too embarrassed to back out. That first night, I lay awake, questioning my sanity, feeling overwhelmed and out of place, wondering how I'd ended up here. But the next morning, as I walked into the common room, the residents greeted me with cautious but hopeful smiles. I could see the weight of their struggles, the silent battles they fought, and it shook something deep within me. I knew I didn't belong here, didn't have the skills they needed, but I stayed, partly because I didn't know how to leave and partly because something about it felt strangely right. Day by day, I got to know the residents, listened to their stories, their regrets, their hopes, and the hard-won victories that others rarely saw. I didn't have much to offer, but I found myself learning more about compassion, patience, and resilience than I'd ever learned in an office cubicle. I had been so wrapped up in the corporate ladder, in the pursuit of success, that I'd never stopped to understand what real hardship looked like, or what it felt like to help people through their darkest moments. Weeks turned into months, and I began to feel a sense of purpose, a fulfillment I'd never known before. It wasn't easy. I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel out of my depth, didn't make mistakes. But the staff, the residents, they didn't hold it against me. They showed me kindness, understanding, and I learned from them, grew because of them. I come here because of a misunderstanding, an accident, yet now I couldn't imagine leaving. One night, I sat outside, watching the stars with a resident who had been through more pain than I could ever imagine. She looked at me, her face soft in the moonlight, and said, "I don't know how you ended up here, but you've helped me more than you know." Sometimes, life puts us exactly where we need to be, even if we don't see it at first. Her words struck me, and I realized she was right. Maybe I'd come here by mistake, but this place, these people, had given me a sense of purpose, a new understanding of what it meant to live a meaningful life. By the time I finally left that center, a year later, I was a different person. I didn't go back to the corporate world, didn't return to the life I'd once planned. Instead, I found myself drawn to nonprofit work, counseling, roles that allowed me to continue making a difference, however small. It was the biggest change I'd ever made, a shift I'd never expected. All because of a misunderstanding, a single email that led me down a path I'd never have chosen on my own. And sometimes, in the quiet moments, I think back to that night, to the fear and uncertainty, and I realize how grateful I am for that mistake, for the chance to find a new purpose in the most unlikely of places. The text that changed everything, a surprising confession. The text that changed everything, a surprising confession. I remember it like it was yesterday. It was late, close to midnight, and I was scrolling through my phone, half asleep, mindlessly flipping between social media apps when a text notification lit up my screen. It was from an unknown number, which immediately jolted me awake, because who sends a message at that hour without expecting a real conversation? I hesitated for a moment before clicking it open, thinking maybe it was spam or a wrong number. But the first line caught my eye. "I have something I need to tell you. You're the only person I can trust." I reread the words, trying to place the voice behind the text, as if I'd recognize someone's typing style alone. My initial instinct was to ignore it, to chalk it up to some elaborate prank, but something about the tone felt genuine, almost desperate. Against my better judgment, I replied, asking, "Who is this?" Almost immediately, a response popped up. "I can't tell you who I am just yet, but I swear I'm someone you know, someone close." I stared at the screen, a chill creeping up my spine, wondering who would message me like this and why. My mind raced, thinking of friends, family, even distant acquaintances who might need to confess something, but no one fit the bill. The stranger sent another message before I could type a response. "I need you to promise not to tell anyone about this conversation." I need to get this off my chest, and you're the only one who'll understand. Curiosity gripped me, and against all logic, I typed back, I promise. What's going on? The messages came in faster now, as if they'd been waiting for that green light. I've done something. Something bad. I never thought it would go this far, and I can't sleep at night anymore. I see it, hear it, replay it in my mind, and I don't know how to escape. My heart was pounding now, a mix of fear and intrigue, wondering what kind of thing this person could have done that would haunt them so intensely. Part of me wanted to stop, to ignore them and delete the messages, but another part felt drawn in, like I had to know the rest of the story. What happened? I replied, trying to keep my tone neutral, hoping that they would keep talking, hoping I could somehow uncover their identity. The stranger continued, detailing a night that had gone horribly wrong. They described sneaking out to meet someone, sneaking back in and hearing a noise, a terrible sound that would become the soundtrack of their nightmares. They said they didn't mean to hurt anyone, but they were at the wrong place at the wrong time, that everything went wrong in ways they never could have predicted. The more I read, the more a feeling of dread began to settle over me, a strange, growing sense of familiarity, like the story was tugging at something in the back of my mind. Suddenly, they said something that made my blood run cold. You were there that night, too. My mind froze. Me? I typed back, what do you mean I was there? They replied, I saw you. You didn't know it, but I saw you walk by. I thought about calling out to you, but I didn't want you involved. If you'd seen me, none of this would have happened. My hands were shaking now, my mind racing back through any night that might match what they were describing, but I came up blank. I had no idea what they were talking about. I asked them to clarify, but they only replied, it's better if you don't remember. It's safer that way. But I couldn't hold it in anymore. I couldn't keep this secret on my own. As the words sank in, I felt a surge of anger, confusion, and a deep sense of betrayal. Who was this person? Why did they think I could help them? But the fear was stronger than any anger, fear that whatever they'd done, whatever they thought I might know, could somehow ruin my life, too. My fingers hovered over the screen, tempted to call the police, or to call someone, anyone, who might understand. But before I could make a decision, another message popped up, you think I'm a monster, don't you? I didn't know what to say. I was trapped in their confession, an unwilling participant in whatever dark secret they were carrying, and it felt like a nightmare that I couldn't escape from. Instead of replying, I stayed silent, hoping they'd stop, but they didn't. The stranger went on, describing in chilling detail how they tried to cover up what had happened, how they planned to leave it all behind but couldn't shake the feeling of guilt. And then, the confession took a darker turn. They admitted that they'd started to think someone was following them, that they felt like they were being watched. They said they couldn't tell if it was paranoia or if someone knew what they'd done. At this point, my heart was pounding, my thoughts racing between horror and suspicion, wondering if this was some kind of sick joke. But it felt too real, too raw to be fake. I felt like I was falling down a rabbit hole, getting sucked deeper into a confession I'd never asked for. I typed, why are you telling me all of this? The reply came almost immediately, because if anything happens to me, I need someone to know the truth. And if I don't make it, I need you to tell them I'm sorry. That last sentence sent a shiver down my spine. I typed back, what do you mean, if you don't make it? The response was cryptic, just 3 words that made my heart skip a beat, it's too late. Then, the messages stopped. I waited, watching the screen for more, but nothing came. I tried calling the number, but it went straight to voicemail, the hollow sound of the beep echoing in my ears, leaving me with nothing but my own racing thoughts. I barely slept that night, my mind spinning with questions, trying to piece together fragments of the story, trying to figure out who this person was, what they'd done, and what it had to do with me. In the morning, I considered going to the police, but what would I even tell them? That someone I didn't know had sent me a cryptic confession and then vanished? It sounded insane. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible had happened, that maybe they were really gone, and I was the last person who knew their secret. Days turned into weeks, and I heard nothing more. But every now and then, I'd get an eerie feeling, like someone was watching me, like I'd become part of something dark and sinister that I couldn't escape from. Then, one night, as I was drifting off to sleep, my phone buzzed again. A message from an unknown number lit up my screen. Heart pounding, I opened it, expecting more cryptic words, maybe an explanation, but instead, it was just one line: "You should have kept your promise." I sat there, frozen, my mind reeling, wondering what that meant, wondering if it was the same person or someone else who knew what I'd been told. In the days that followed, I found myself looking over my shoulder, feeling like someone was always a step behind me. The confession that I'd been dragged into had become a shadow over my life, a constant reminder that somewhere out there, someone had trusted me with a terrible truth, and now, that trust was haunting me. And every time I looked at my phone, I half expected another message, a chilling reminder that the secret I tried to forget was still out there, lurking, waiting to pull me back in. I regret not taking a chance, a story of missed opportunities. It's funny how life works sometimes. You don't even realize when the moments that could change everything are slipping through your fingers, not until it's too late. I didn't realize it when I had the chance. I was young, reckless, and filled with that strange confidence that only comes from being naive enough to think nothing could go wrong. But looking back, I wish I had known then what I know now. It was a few years ago, during my last year of college. I was stuck in a routine, waking up for classes, spending hours in the library, hanging out with friends when I had the time, and doing my best to avoid thinking about what would come next. I didn't really know what I wanted out of life, and that uncertainty made me hesitant. I had a friend, Sophie. She was the complete opposite of me, spontaneous, adventurous, and always up for something new. We'd met during freshman year, and even though we were different in almost every way, we became close. She was the kind of person who'd drag me out of my comfort zone, convincing me to go to that party I didn't want to attend, or to skip class just to take a walk with her through the city. She was also the type to chase after what she wanted, no hesitation. I admired that about her, but I didn't think I could live like that. I was always too cautious, too afraid of making the wrong choice, of doing something that might screw up my future. Sophie, though, she didn't care. She had this dream of moving to New York City after graduation. She talked about it constantly, how she wanted to be a photographer, how she could picture herself walking the streets, capturing moments, living her dream. I thought she was crazy. I'd never been to the city, but I didn't think someone like her, someone with big aspirations and no backup plan, would make it. I was happy to stay where I was, taking the safe route, aiming for the job I thought I should have. But Sophie. She made things happen. I'll never forget the night she sat me down in our favorite cafe, the one we used to go to when we needed to talk. She looked serious, her eyes wide, as if she had something important to say. She told me she had been offered a photography internship in New York. It wasn't just any internship, it was with a major agency, one that could open doors to the kind of career she'd always dreamed of. I remember how excited she was, how she practically glowed when she spoke about it. But she also told me something that I didn't expect: she wanted me to come with her. She didn't want to go alone, and she thought we'd be great together in the city, both of us starting fresh, finding our way. She said she needed someone who knew her, someone who could help her settle in and keep her grounded while she took risks. And there it was, the choice that could have changed everything. I could have said yes. I could have thrown caution to the wind, packed up my life, and gone with her. But instead, I did what I always did. I hesitated. I asked her about the risks, about how we would make it in such a big city, how I would get a job. I asked her how we would afford rent, how I would even survive in a place like that. She tried to reassure me, saying we could figure it out together, that she knew people who could help, that we had time to plan. But I couldn't get past the fear. The fear of failure, the fear of not being good enough, the fear of leaving everything behind. I couldn't do it. So I told her no. I said I wasn't ready, that I needed to stay where I was, that I had a future to build, and New York wasn't part of it. Sophie was disappointed, but she didn't push. She understood, or at least, I thought she did. She ended up moving to New York by herself, and I stayed behind. For a while, I convinced myself that I had made the right decision. I told myself that I was being practical, that my future was too important to risk it all on a whim. I threw myself into my studies, got a job in the city, and kept moving forward, just like everyone else. But the truth is, I didn't stop thinking about Sophie. She kept in touch, sending me photos of her adventures in the city, photos of iconic places, people, and moments that I knew I could have been a part of if I had just taken that leap. It was hard not to feel a pang of regret each time I saw her photos on social media or heard her talk about the new friends she had made, the projects she was working on, the people she was meeting. It was even harder when she would call me, her voice filled with excitement as she told me how much she loved it there, how everything was falling into place. And then one day, I got the message. It was from Sophie. It had been months since we last talked in person, and this was the first time in a while that she had called me directly. "I met someone," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "I met someone who sees me, who gets me. I think I've finally found what I was looking for." I didn't know how to respond. I wanted to be happy for her, but a part of me couldn't shake the feeling of loss. It wasn't that I wanted to be the one for her, it was the fact that I had missed out on everything. I had missed out on the chance to take risks, to change my life, to follow a dream that wasn't even mine but felt like it could have been. I had chosen the safe route, the easy route, and now it was too late to go back. That was when it hit me. I had wasted so much time, so many years, being afraid to take chances, being afraid to fail. I had passed up so many opportunities because I didn't want to mess up, but in the process, I had missed out on everything. Sophie had taken the leap, and now she was living the life she had always dreamed of. Meanwhile, I was stuck in the same place, in the same routine, wondering where it all went wrong. I tried to convince myself that it wasn't too late, that I could still make a change, that I could still take chances. But deep down, I knew I had missed my window. I had missed my chance to be a part of something bigger, to live a life that wasn't dictated by fear and uncertainty. And as I sat in my small apartment that night, alone with my thoughts, I realized that I would always regret not taking that chance. Maybe it's the fear that holds us back, or maybe it's just the way we convince ourselves that we're not ready for change. But one thing is certain, when you let those opportunities slip away, when you let fear rule your choices, you'll find yourself looking back with nothing but regret. So, if you're reading this and you're standing at a crossroads, unsure of what to do, unsure of whether to take the leap, do it. Take the chance. Don't wait until it's too late like I did. Because one day, you'll realize that the opportunity you passed up was the one that could have changed everything. And you'll wish you had taken it. The most embarrassing moment of my life, lessons learned. It was supposed to be an ordinary day, just like any other. I never imagined it would end up being the most embarrassing moment of my life, one that would haunt me for years to come. I was at a local coffee shop, grabbing my usual morning caffeine fix before heading to work. Everything felt normal. I walked up to the counter, ordered my coffee, and stood in line waiting for my name to be called. As I was scrolling through my phone, I didn't notice how crowded the shop had become. The line was long, and the buzz of conversations filled the air. I could hear the sounds of steam from the espresso machine, the clink of cups and saucers, and the occasional burst of laughter. I had just finished reading a text from a friend when I heard my name. "Samantha." The barista called, holding up my coffee cup with a bright smile. "Here you go." I looked up, smiled back, and walked over to grab my drink. As I reached for it, I felt a sharp push from behind. It wasn't hard, but it was enough to make me lose my balance. In that instant, my heart sank. My hand went to steady myself, but my coffee cup, which had been in my other hand, flew out of my grasp. It was like slow motion, the cup tumbling through the air. The moment it landed, it exploded in a mess of hot coffee and splattered all over the counter, the barista, and, most painfully, me. The hot liquid burned through the fabric of my shirt, and I yelped in surprise and pain. The people around me froze. The barista's eyes widened in shock, and everyone turned to stare as the thick, dark coffee dripped down my arms and legs. I was covered in it. The embarrassment hit me instantly, flooding my face with heat. I tried to apologize, but my voice caught in my throat. I was mortified, completely frozen, unable to process what had just happened. The barista, trying to recover from the situation, rushed to grab napkins and a towel, but the damage had already been done. People in line behind me shuffled uncomfortably, and some even turned away to avoid the awkwardness. My heart was racing. I wanted to sink into the floor and disappear. I tried to wipe the coffee off my shirt, but it just smeared and stained my clothes further. The burn from the liquid was still sharp, and the worst part was the laughter. Not from anyone in particular, but from the uncomfortable, awkward chuckles that spread through the crowd. It was as though everyone was trying to stifle their amusement at my expense. I could feel their eyes on me, the weight of their judgment sinking in. The barista, now looking utterly uncomfortable, handed me a paper towel and apologized profusely. "I'm so sorry. Are you okay?" she asked. I nodded numbly, but my face was still burning with embarrassment. I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to be there anymore, but I also didn't want to run out, drawing even more attention to myself. So, I just stood there, awkwardly dabbing at my shirt, hoping I could somehow fix the situation. But I couldn't. I knew it was hopeless. I had become the focal point of the morning, and everyone in that coffee shop knew exactly who I was. I glanced around, avoiding eye contact with anyone. I just wanted to grab my coffee and leave, but I couldn't bring myself to look anyone in the eye. Instead, I turned to walk out the door, my shirt still wet and uncomfortable, feeling the weight of everyone's gaze following me. I made it to the door when I heard a voice call out behind me. "Hey, you dropped something." I turned, my face a mask of humiliation, but there was no one there. It took me a second to realize the voice had come from a man standing near the counter, who was now pointing down at the floor. My heart stopped. I looked down and saw, lying at my feet, my wallet. It must have fallen from my bag when I reached for the coffee, but in my panic, I hadn't noticed. "Oh my God," I muttered, feeling like I was about to implode. I bent down to pick it up, but as I did, I felt something else. A sharp pain shot through my foot. It was like a jolt of electricity, and I cried out in pain as I stumbled back. A small paper clip had somehow found its way under my foot, and I stepped on it wrong. The pain intensified, and I nearly lost my balance. I felt like I was in a nightmare. I hobbled to the door, my foot throbbing, my shirt still soaked in coffee, and my wallet clutched tightly in my hand. I could hear people behind me whispering, some still trying to stifle their laughter. I didn't care anymore. I just wanted to escape. As I limped out into the street, I heard the coffee shop door close behind me, the faint sound of muffled voices still echoing in my head. The rest of the day was a blur. I got to work, but my focus was gone. My colleagues greeted me with concerned looks, noticing my disheveled state and the visible burn marks on my arms. I just shrugged it off, telling them I'd had an accident at the coffee shop. They were sympathetic, but I couldn't shake the feeling that they were all thinking the same thing. I was a walking disaster. The embarrassment of the morning lingered with me for hours. I kept replaying every moment in my head, imagining how ridiculous I must have looked. The whole situation was completely absurd, but the worst part wasn't the coffee or the burn marks. It was how I let it all consume me. I let that one moment of clumsiness define my day, my mood, and my mindset. I let it affect the way I saw myself and the way I thought others saw me. And that's when I realized something important. It wasn't the coffee, the burn, or the awkwardness that had ruined my day. It was how I reacted to it. How I let a small, embarrassing incident snowball into something I couldn't escape from. That's when I decided to change my perspective. I started to laugh at myself. The incident was embarrassing, yes, but it wasn't the end of the world. I could move past it, learn from it, and let it go. I learned that sometimes, the most embarrassing moments can teach you valuable lessons about resilience, about not taking yourself too seriously, and about finding humor in the unexpected. After all, life is messy, and not everything is going to go according to plan. But it's how we handle those moments that truly defines us. Looking back, that embarrassing moment taught me more than any other event in my life. It taught me that failure isn't something to run from, but something to embrace and learn from. It taught me that sometimes, the best thing to do in a moment of humiliation is to take a deep breath, laugh, and move on. And above all, it taught me that it's okay to make mistakes. What matters is how you grow from them. And that day, I learned a valuable lesson: never underestimate the power of a good laugh at your own expense. It can turn even the most embarrassing moment into something empowering. Aita forgoing no contact with my manipulative in-laws? I didn't think I would ever get to this point, but here I am, sitting on my couch, staring at my phone with a mix of dread and relief. The decision to go no contact with my in-laws wasn't made lightly, but after years of emotional manipulation and toxic interactions, I finally reached my breaking point. It all started innocently enough when I married my husband, Jake, 5 years ago. I was excited to become part of a new family, but I quickly realized that his parents had a different vision of what that meant. They were charming at first, always smiling and welcoming, but beneath that veneer lay a web of control and expectations that would soon entrap me. It began with subtle comments about how I should dress or how I should decorate my home. They would criticize my cooking or my approach to parenting, suggesting that I was not good enough for their son. I tried to brush it off, thinking they meant well, but it became increasingly clear that they thrived on criticism and guilt. Their behavior escalated when I became pregnant with our first child. Suddenly, my body was no longer my own. It was a topic of discussion at family gatherings. "Are you really going to eat that?" they would ask, scrutinizing my choices. "You should be more mindful of what you put into your body for the baby." I felt suffocated by their opinions, and every interaction felt like a test of my worthiness as a mother. The real tipping point came when our son was born. Jake and I were ecstatic, but my in-laws turned what should have been a joyous occasion into a power struggle. They insisted on being present in the delivery room, which made me uncomfortable. I thought it was a private moment meant for my husband and me, but they argued that they had a right to be there since they were family. Jake, caught between his loyalties, ultimately sided with them. The birth itself was overwhelming, and when my son finally arrived, my in-laws invaded the room like a storm, demanding to hold him and take pictures. I remember feeling a wave of resentment wash over me as they fawned over him while I lay exhausted in bed. Their behavior didn't stop there. They insisted on choosing our son's name, stating that it was a family tradition to honor a relative. They even created a family tree, tracing their lineage and inserting our son's name in the middle, as if it were their right. I felt completely powerless, and every time I voiced my concerns to Jake, he brushed them aside, insisting that they were just excited grandparents. I began to feel like a stranger in my own home, and the emotional manipulation reached a boiling point during my son's first birthday party. I had envisioned a small gathering with close friends and family, but my in-laws took over the planning, inviting their friends and turning it into a lavish affair that felt more like a wedding than a birthday party. When I expressed my desire for a more intimate celebration, they accused me of being ungrateful. I felt trapped, and when the day finally arrived, I could barely enjoy it. I stood on the sidelines as they played host, taking charge of every aspect of the event while I struggled to keep my composure. After that day, I realized I couldn't continue living like this. I felt suffocated by their expectations and constantly judged by their standards. Jake didn't see the damage being done to our relationship, and every time I tried to explain my feelings, he dismissed my concerns, telling me I was overreacting. I knew I had to make a choice, and that's when I decided to go no contact with my in-laws. It wasn't an easy decision. I felt guilty for cutting them off, but I knew it was necessary for my mental health. I wrote a letter to them, explaining my feelings and the reasons for my decision. I expressed my love for Jake and our son but made it clear that their behavior was unacceptable. I sent the letter and braced myself for the fallout. When I told Jake what I had done, he was furious. He accused me of tearing our family apart and being selfish. "They're my parents. You can't just erase them from our lives," he yelled, and I felt the weight of his disappointment crashing down on me. I tried to explain my side, but he was too angry to listen. Days turned into weeks, and the silence was deafening. I felt a mix of relief and guilt, but I was finally able to breathe again. I focused on rebuilding my relationship with Jake, but the tension lingered. Eventually, Jake's parents began reaching out through texts and emails, trying to manipulate the situation further. They claimed to be devastated and heartbroken, pleading for a chance to talk. I ignored their messages, knowing that engaging with them would only drag me back into the toxicity I had fought so hard to escape. It was then that I realized how deeply ingrained their influence was in our lives. Jake began to withdraw, spending more time at his parents' house and less with me and our son. It felt like a betrayal, and I couldn't shake the feeling that he was choosing them over us. One evening, after another heated argument about my in-laws, Jake came home late. He reeked of alcohol and sadness, and I could see the weight of his guilt etched on his face. "I just don't understand how you could do this," he said, tears welling in his eyes. "They're my family." I felt my heart break for him, but I also felt an overwhelming sense of anger for how he had failed to protect me. "You're choosing them over our family," I replied, my voice trembling. "You don't see how toxic they are." In that moment, I realized we were at a crossroads. I loved him, but I couldn't continue living in a situation where my mental health was compromised. I made the tough decision to give him an ultimatum. You need to choose, Jake. It's either me and our son or them. His face twisted in anguish as he realized the gravity of the situation. He took a step back, visibly shaken by my words. I can't do that, he whispered, his voice cracking. They're my parents. I felt like my heart was shattering, knowing that he was unable to see the toxicity that had infiltrated our lives. Days turned into weeks, and the tension in our home grew unbearable. I focused on my son, pouring my love into him while Jake remained distant, torn between his parents and his family. Eventually, the breaking point came during a family gathering at my sister's house. Jake's parents showed up uninvited, determined to make their presence known. I felt my heart race as I watched them waltz into the party, their smiles wide and fake. They immediately began taking charge, asking my sister questions about the decorations and planning the menu without so much as a hello to me. I felt my blood boil as they ignored my existence, and when they pulled my son away to show him off to their friends, I snapped. "Excuse me," I said, my voice trembling with anger. "Can you please give me back my son?" The room fell silent, and all eyes turned to me. Jake's parents looked shocked, their smiles fading as they processed my words. "He's not your prop to show off," I continued, my voice rising. "He's my son." The tension was palpable as my sister tried to defuse the situation, but I felt a rush of liberation. I was no longer the silent victim, I was reclaiming my voice. Jake stepped in, his expression a mix of anger and embarrassment. "What are you doing?" he hissed. "This isn't the time or place." "No, Jake. This is exactly the time," I replied, my heart racing. "I'm done playing nice. Your parents are manipulative, and I refuse to let them dictate our lives any longer." The argument escalated, and it felt like a dam had finally broken. I didn't hold back, laying bare all the resentment I had been holding inside. I spoke about how their behavior had affected me and how their constant manipulation had put a strain on our marriage. I could see the shock on everyone's faces, including Jake's. He looked torn, caught between defending his parents and protecting me. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Jake's parents retreated, their smiles replaced by scowls. They left the party in a huff, and I felt a strange sense of victory. I had finally stood up for myself, but it came at a price. The aftermath was brutal. Jake was furious and hurt, and our relationship became strained. I felt like I had taken a bold step for my mental health, but it had shattered the fragile bond we had built over the years. "You didn't have to do that," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You could have just let it go." "I couldn't let it go anymore, Jake. I needed you to see how toxic they are," I replied, my heart aching. But I knew he was still blinded by his loyalty to them, and the gulf between us grew wider. I started to question my decision to go no contact. Was I wrong for wanting to protect myself? Had I destroyed my family in the process? As days turned into weeks, I found solace in the support of my friends and sister, who reassured me that I had made the right choice. They reminded me of the emotional toll my in-laws had taken on my mental health. I began to rebuild my life, focusing on my son and my own well-being, but the pain of losing Jake lingered like a shadow. Eventually, I reached out to a therapist who helped me process my feelings of guilt and anger. I began to understand that going no contact wasn't a punishment, it was a necessary step. When a simple favor turned into a complicated mess. I never expected something so simple to spiral so out of control, but looking back, I should have known better. It all started when my friend Amy asked me for a small favor. She was in a tough spot, her car had broken down, and she needed a ride to an important meeting. Now, I knew she was always reliable, someone who had always helped me out when I needed it, so of course, I said yes. It was just a ride, after all. How could it turn into anything complicated? That was my first mistake, underestimating how much could go wrong when you step into someone else's world without fully understanding what's at stake. I agreed without thinking, picked her up at her place, and we were on our way. The drive was uneventful at first, just the usual chatter about life, work, the things we always talked about when we got together. But as we neared the destination, something felt off. Amy was being quieter than usual, glancing out the window, tapping her fingers nervously on the armrest. It was subtle, but I noticed it. "Are you okay?" I asked, trying to break the tension. She forced a smile. "Yeah, just a little stressed." Big meeting today. That wasn't unusual. Amy was always a little on edge before big presentations, but this time, it seemed different. She was acting like she was holding something back, like there was more going on than she was willing to let me in on. I didn't press her, though. I figured it was just the nerves. We pulled up to the building where her meeting was taking place. She thanked me and got out, but as she walked toward the entrance, she turned around. "Hey," she called, hesitating for a moment, "can you do me another favor while I'm in there?" "Of course, what's up?" I replied. "Can you just wait for me in the car? I'll be back in an hour. I don't want to be alone when I leave, okay? I really need you to be there." I was confused, but I agreed. I mean, it wasn't a big deal, right? Just sit in the car for a bit while she handled her business. But then things started to get strange. As I waited, I noticed people coming and going from the building. One man, in particular, caught my eye. He was walking toward the building, his phone pressed to his ear, but what stood out to me was how familiar he looked. I couldn't place him at first, but there was something about his demeanor that made me uneasy. Maybe it was the way he kept glancing at my car, or the fact that he was clearly agitated. I tried to shake it off, but I couldn't stop watching him. After a few minutes, he disappeared inside the building, and I went back to scrolling through my phone. But that was when things started getting worse. I heard a knock on my window. I jumped, startled, and looked up to see Amy standing there, her face pale, her eyes wide with fear. "Get in," she whispered urgently. "We have to go, now." I didn't ask any questions. I unlocked the door, and she got in quickly, slamming the door shut behind her. Her hands were shaking, and her breath was ragged. "What happened?" I asked, trying to stay calm. "Who was that guy?" "I don't want to talk about it right now," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Just drive." Something in her voice made it clear that whatever had happened was serious. I didn't push her further. I just started the car and pulled away from the building, glancing in the rearview mirror. That's when I saw him. The man I had noticed earlier was now following us, tailing us closely in his car. My heart started to race. "Amy, who is that?" I asked, my voice shaking. She didn't answer, her eyes fixed on the road ahead. The silence between us was deafening. As we turned down a side street, I tried to lose him, making sharp turns and speeding up, but the car behind us stayed right on our tail. "I don't know what to do," Amy muttered under her breath, her hands clutching the seat. "I didn't want you to get involved, but now I have no choice. He's going to hurt me if I don't get away." "What do you mean? Who is he?" I asked, my mind racing. "What's going on?" She finally turned to me, her eyes wide with terror. "He's not just some guy," she said, her voice trembling. "He's someone I used to be involved with. Someone I thought I got away from. But he found me. And now he's coming for me, and he's going to make sure I pay for what I did." I was speechless. What could I even say to that? How did I get myself into this? This simple favor had turned into a nightmare. I tried to stay calm, but the adrenaline was taking over. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, and I could see his headlights getting closer. He was right behind us now. I was running out of options. "We have to get somewhere safe," I said, my voice tight with panic. "We can't outrun him. We need to hide." But Amy just shook her head. "He knows all the places I go. He'll find us no matter what we do. The only way out of this is to confront him." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Confront him? What was I supposed to do, fight a man who clearly wasn't afraid of anything? I didn't know what to do, but I couldn't just leave her. I couldn't abandon her in this mess. So I did what any decent person would do in that moment. I kept driving. We wound our way through the back streets, trying to lose him, but he was relentless. Finally, after what felt like hours, I spotted a police station up ahead. I pulled in quickly, hoping to get some kind of help. But as soon as I stopped the car, Amy froze. "What's wrong?" I asked, my voice panicked. "You need to get out of here." "Don't go inside," she said, almost pleading. "Why? What's going on?" I demanded. "Because they're not going to help you," she said, her eyes filling with tears. "I wasn't just trying to get away from him, I'm running from the law, too. I did something horrible. And if they find out, it's not just him I'll have to worry about. It's everyone. The words hit me like a ton of bricks. All this time, I had been trying to help her, trying to be a good friend, but I had no idea what I had walked into. This wasn't just about a guy chasing her, it was about her running from something much darker. Now, I was tangled up in a situation I didn't know how to escape. Amy wasn't who I thought she was. She wasn't just some friend asking for a favor. She was hiding something dangerous. Something that had turned my simple favor into a complicated mess. As I sat there, in front of that police station, not knowing what to do, I realized I was caught in a nightmare of her making, and there was no way out. Not for me, not for her. And now, I was in too deep. The only question left was, could I get out alive? My family's reaction to my career choice, you won't believe it. My family's reaction to my career choice, you won't believe it. I never thought my career choice would lead to such a huge rift with my family, especially since I'd always been close to them. Growing up, there was this unspoken rule in our family that we'd follow respectable paths. My dad was a surgeon, my mom a successful lawyer, and even my older siblings took traditional routes. One became a banker, and the other a professor. So, when I first announced my decision to them, I didn't expect an easy conversation, but I didn't anticipate the intensity of their response either. I'd been in school for a few years, dutifully studying pre-med like they wanted, going through the motions even though I knew deep down it wasn't for me. Every biology lecture, every chemistry lab, and every hour spent buried in medical textbooks felt like I was sinking further away from myself. Then, in my second year, I stumbled into an elective art class, just needing something to break up the monotony, something that would give me a breath of fresh air from the heavy science load. But that class changed everything. Suddenly, I felt alive. Sketching, painting, sculpting, everything about it felt right, like I'd finally found what I was meant to do. I started spending more time in the studio, working late nights, skipping study sessions, missing family calls because I was too engrossed in my latest piece. It wasn't long before I made the decision to drop pre-med altogether and pursue art full-time. I wanted to break the news gently, so I planned a family dinner. They all arrived, looking proud and expectant, thinking I'd be sharing my plans for med school applications. I took a deep breath and told them I'd made a decision about my future. I'm going to be an artist, I said, trying to keep my voice steady, thinking that if I sounded confident, they'd accept it. Silence filled the room. My dad's face fell, and my mom just stared, like I'd spoken a foreign language. My older brother laughed, thinking I was joking, and when I didn't laugh with him, his face turned cold. An artist. My mom finally said, her voice laced with disappointment. Do you know how hard we've worked to give you this opportunity? And you're throwing it all away for painting. My dad's reaction was even worse. He stood up, not saying a word, just shaking his head as he left the table. I could feel my chest tighten as I watched them all turn away, unable or unwilling to understand. They kept calling my decision a phase, a waste of my potential, a betrayal of the family's legacy. For weeks, they tried everything to change my mind. They held interventions, bringing in family friends and mentors to talk me out of it. They reminded me of every sacrifice they'd made, of the dreams they'd had for me since I was a kid. They stopped helping with my tuition, thinking financial pressure would bring me to my senses. But instead, it made me more determined. I started working 2 part-time jobs just to stay afloat, sacrificing sleep and social life to keep myself in school. I'd spend my nights in the art studio, often crying from the exhaustion but never once regretting my decision. My work improved, and soon, I was invited to participate in a local art showcase. I thought maybe this would be my chance to show my family I was serious, that I wasn't just playing around. I invited them, even though I was terrified they wouldn't come. On the night of the show, I scanned the crowd, hoping to see familiar faces, but they didn't come. Instead, they texted me after, saying they were disappointed and didn't want to support a mistake. I felt crushed, but I poured that pain into my art. My work started getting noticed, and I even sold a few pieces. A well-known gallery offered to feature me, and for the first time, I felt a flicker of hope that maybe I'd prove them wrong. Months passed, and I continued to struggle, balancing work, school, and my art. Then, one evening, as I was preparing for my gallery debut, my mom showed up at my apartment unannounced. She looked around at my cramped space, at the walls covered in my art, and she looked tired, like she'd finally come to terms with the reality of my choice. We had a long talk that night. She didn't apologize, but she did ask questions, for the first time trying to understand why this mattered to me. "You were supposed to be our success story," she whispered, as if talking to herself more than to me. "We thought you'd make us proud." Her words stung, but I took a deep breath and told her how art made me feel, how it filled a part of me that nothing else ever had, and how much I wished they could be proud of me for following my own path, not theirs. She didn't say much when she left, but I could tell something had shifted. She didn't mention my career again, and for the next year, there was a tense but quieter acceptance. My dad and siblings still kept their distance, barely acknowledging my art or my progress. It wasn't until the gallery debut that things changed. I'd sent invitations to everyone, not expecting any of them to come. But to my shock, they showed up, dressed in their best, looking awkward and uncomfortable in the art world setting. As they walked through the gallery, seeing my work hung proudly on the walls, I saw them glancing at each other, whispering, pointing at pieces, recognizing bits of our family history woven into my paintings. One of my pieces, a large, bold canvas representing my journey and struggles, seemed to catch my dad's attention. He stood in front of it for a long time, just staring, and I could see his eyes softening, the disappointment easing just a little. After the show, he approached me, and for the first time, he looked at me not with judgment, but with a hint of respect. "You really made something of yourself," he said quietly. It wasn't an apology, and it didn't erase the years of tension, but it was a start. My family still doesn't fully understand my choice, and they may never see art the way I do, but now they're beginning to accept that my path, while different, is just as valid as theirs. And in that small step, I found a strange kind of peace. A random act of kindness changed my day. A random act of kindness changed my day was how it all started, or at least, how I thought it started, because that morning I had barely managed to drag myself out of bed and into some semblance of a routine. Everything felt off, like the world was playing a cruel joke that only I was in on. My alarm didn't go off, my favorite shirt was wrinkled beyond repair, I spilled coffee on myself just as I was walking out the door. By the time I made it to the coffee shop near work, I was done, absolutely ready to call in sick and crawl back under my covers. But then, as I reached the counter, fumbling through my wallet, I heard a voice beside me say, "It's on me." I looked up to see a stranger, maybe in his 50s, dressed in an old tweed jacket that looked like it had seen better days, smiling at me warmly. Before I could refuse, he handed the cashier a crumpled bill and turned to me with the strangest smile. "Kindness opens doors no one else can see," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, his gaze piercing and unblinking. I didn't know how to respond, so I just mumbled a thank you and took my coffee, thinking maybe he was just a lonely man trying to make small talk, but something about his eyes followed me even as I walked out of the shop. At first, I shrugged it off, maybe he was just trying to be friendly, a little eccentric, sure, but harmless. But then, as I went about my day, I couldn't shake his words. It was as if they'd woven themselves into my thoughts, resurfacing at the strangest times, his voice echoing in my mind, "Kindness opens doors." It got stranger when I went into the bathroom at work and saw those exact words, "Kindness opens doors no one else can see," written on the mirror in a faint, foggy smudge. I laughed it off, thinking maybe it was a coincidence, or maybe someone else had heard the same line. But the more I tried to ignore it, the more the words seemed to haunt me. I started noticing little things. A stranger would smile at me on the subway, or someone would hold the door open just a second too long, staring a little too hard, their expression too intense. The day slipped by in a strange blur of overly kind faces and lingering stares, and by evening, I was starting to feel the weight of it, an itch I couldn't scratch. I couldn't explain it, but it felt like the world was pressing in, like every kind act I received had some hidden meaning I couldn't see. It wasn't until I nearly got hit by a car crossing the street that I realized something was really wrong. I hadn't even seen it coming, but just as it barreled toward me, a hand grabbed my arm and yanked me back onto the curb. I turned to thank my rescuer, only to find an old woman smiling at me with the same eerie, knowing expression as the stranger from the coffee shop. "Kindness opens doors no one else can see," she whispered before shuffling away, her gaze lingering on me just a second too long. I stood there, frozen, heart pounding as I watched her disappear into the crowd. At that moment, something clicked, a horrifying realization that maybe this wasn't just a coincidence. The phrase echoed in my mind, growing louder, feeding the paranoia creeping into my bones. I tried to brush it off, tried to convince myself I was imagining things, but I couldn't escape the feeling that something was horribly wrong. People started acting different around me, like they knew something I didn't, smiling at me with that same unsettling look, muttering the same words under their breath. I tried to tell myself it was all in my head, but every time I looked around, there they were, strangers, friends, even my own reflection seemed to watch me with that eerie, knowing gaze. I tried calling friends, tried telling them what was happening, but no one took me seriously, chalking it up to stress or lack of sleep. As night fell, I found myself wandering the streets, desperate to escape the invisible weight pressing down on me. I needed answers, needed to find the stranger from the coffee shop and demand he explain what he'd done to me. Somehow, I knew he was the key to all of this, the only one who could make it stop. After hours of searching, I finally spotted him in a dimly lit cafe, sitting alone at a corner table. I stormed up to him, my hands shaking, demanding to know why he'd said those words, why everyone was repeating them, what he'd done to me. He looked up, his eyes calm and cold, and said, "Kindness opens doors no one else can see, but you must be willing to step through." He didn't say anything more, just smiled that strange, empty smile, and in that moment, I realized with a sickening dread that I'd never be free. I was trapped, a puppet to some twisted kindness I didn't understand, doomed to carry his message, to spread his words, to watch that same madness take root in others. As I left the cafe, I found myself repeating his words to a passing stranger, my voice trembling, feeling a strange sense of satisfaction as their face shifted, their eyes clouding over with the same haunted look I'd seen in my own. The drama unfolded at my family reunion. Here's what happened. It was supposed to be a typical family reunion, one of those laid-back affairs where we all gathered at my aunt's house, caught up on each other's lives, and indulged in the same tired old jokes and anecdotes we'd heard 1,000 times before. Every year, my extended family would gather, most of them from out of town, for a weekend of barbecues, games, and a lot of awkward small talk. But this year was different. Something was off. I could feel it the moment I walked in the door. There was a tension in the air, something I couldn't quite put my finger on, but it was there, like a cloud hanging over the usual light-hearted chaos. It wasn't long before I found out exactly what had been building up in the weeks leading up to the reunion. It all started with my cousin, Hannah. She had been acting strangely for months, withdrawing from the family, avoiding group chats, and generally keeping to herself. I figured she was just going through a phase, maybe some personal stuff she didn't want to share, but I had no idea what was really going on. The moment she arrived at the reunion, she seemed even more distant than usual. She wasn't her bubbly, sarcastic self, she was quieter, almost nervous. Her eyes darted around the room as if she was searching for something, or someone. That's when I noticed him. Eric, her ex-boyfriend, had shown up too, despite the fact that their breakup had been nothing short of dramatic. They had been together for nearly 5 years, and everyone had thought they were the perfect couple, until the explosive breakup that had torn the family apart. I hadn't seen Eric in months, but here he was, standing in the corner, looking just as uncomfortable as everyone else. It was clear he wasn't welcome, not after the way things had ended between him and Hannah. The breakup had been messy. He'd cheated on her, or at least that's what she had said, and the fallout had been brutal. Hannah had cut him off completely, but somehow, he had wormed his way back into the family's good graces. That's when the whispers started. Aunt Linda, who always had a way of getting the juiciest gossip, pulled me aside and whispered in my ear that Eric had been acting strange lately, coming around asking for forgiveness, trying to win back Hannah. But the worst part? He wasn't just asking for her forgiveness, he was asking for a second chance. As the day went on, the tension only grew. People avoided each other's eyes, conversations died as soon as they began, and even the kids seemed to feel it. We all tried to pretend everything was fine, but it was impossible to ignore the elephant in the room. I caught snippets of conversations, bits of gossip that filled in the gaps. Apparently, Hannah had been seeing someone new, someone she'd been keeping quiet about. She hadn't told anyone the details, but the rumors were flying fast. Some said he was a wealthy businessman, others said he was a childhood friend, but no one knew for sure. What was clear, however, was that Hannah was still deeply hurt by Eric's betrayal, but she was trying to move on. As the evening wore on, things finally came to a head. We were all gathered in the backyard, just finishing up dinner, when Hannah and Eric were both standing at the grill at the same time, awkwardly side by side. That's when Eric made his move. He stepped up to her, his voice low but steady, and said, "Hannah, I know I messed up. I'm sorry. I've changed. I know you don't believe me, but I've been working on myself. Can we please talk?" Hannah froze. The air seemed to thicken as everyone around the grill held their breath, waiting for her response. For a moment, it seemed like she might actually listen to him, and I could feel the pit in my stomach growing. She hadn't spoken to him in months. This wasn't the time or the place for him to be making this kind of move. She turned to face him, her eyes blazing with something I couldn't read, and then she said, "You don't get to do this. Not here. Not now. You don't get to come back into my life just because you think you've learned a lesson." There was a pause, and then she added, "I'm happy now, Eric. And you don't get to ruin that." Her words were like a slap in the face, loud and clear enough for everyone to hear. Eric stood there, frozen, his face turning red with embarrassment. I could see the hurt in his eyes, the realization that Hannah wasn't going to forgive him, that he had no place in her life anymore. But that wasn't the end of it. As if things couldn't get worse, out of nowhere, someone yelled, "What about the new guy, huh? Is that what this is all about?" It was my cousin Jason, always the troublemaker, and the room fell silent as he stood up, pointing his finger at Hannah. "You're just going to forget everything Eric did for some guy we've never even met?" I couldn't believe it. Jason was known for stirring up drama, but this was crossing a line. The whole family was now caught in the crossfire, all eyes on Hannah and Eric, waiting for the next move. Hannah, clearly done with the conversation, snapped back, "You have no idea what's going on, Jason. You don't get to judge me. You don't know what it's like to be lied to and cheated on. So, keep your opinions to yourself." I could feel the heat building, the tension thickening, but the worst was yet to come. Just as I thought the situation was finally starting to simmer down, another cousin, Mark, chimed in. "Well, if Eric's out, then what about me? I was there for you when you were with him. And now you're just going to throw all that away for some stranger?" And that was it. That was the straw that broke the camel's back. Eric snapped. "You think I'm some kind of joke? You think I'm just going to sit here and take this?" He turned on Mark, his voice rising with anger. "I made mistakes, yeah, but I'm trying to fix things. I'm trying to make up for it, and you all just want to make me feel like garbage." The argument escalated quickly from there. Everyone started shouting, cousins yelling at cousins, aunts and uncles trying to play peacemakers, but it was all a mess. People were storming off, fighting, crying, and I could barely process it all. I didn't know who was right, who was wrong, but it didn't matter anymore. The reunion, which had started as a chance to reconnect, had turned into a battlefield. The next morning, things were eerily quiet. The usual post-reunion cleanup was happening, but the energy had shifted. People avoided eye contact, some left early, others stayed behind to talk in hushed tones. It was a family reunion that had turned into a family crisis. I don't know what happened after that, whether things ever got resolved, or if the rift between Eric and Hannah was ever healed. But I knew one thing for sure, things would never be the same again. The drama that unfolded at my family reunion wasn't just a one-time thing. It left scars, deep ones that would take years to heal, and no matter how much time passed, we would all remember that one day when everything fell apart. How I turned a bad day into a great one, my journey. How I turned a bad day into a great one. My journey started with a morning that couldn't have gone worse if I'd tried. It was as though every little thing conspired to ruin my day before it even began. My alarm didn't go off, my coffee maker broke, and as I rushed out the door with an empty stomach and frayed nerves, I stepped directly into a puddle that soaked my only pair of decent shoes. I considered just calling in sick right then, but something inside me insisted that maybe I could still salvage it, so I trudged on, convincing myself that things would get better. On the subway, however, things only got worse. A guy with no sense of personal space bumped into me and spilled his coffee all over my clothes. I barely managed to stifle my frustration, plastering on a forced smile, and tried to clean myself up with a crumpled tissue I found in my pocket. My boss had already been on my case about my negative energy, so I told myself to hold it together and keep going, convinced that my luck had to change at some point. But as I arrived at work, I realized I'd forgotten an important presentation file, left sitting on my desk at home. I felt the dread sink in, knowing my boss would use this as yet another reason to reprimand me, and I braced myself for what was sure to be a disastrous day. In a moment of desperation, I decided to take a quick walk to clear my head, hoping that maybe a change of scenery would help. As I walked down a quiet alleyway, something caught my eye, a small, faded sign that I'd never noticed before, pointing toward a door with the words Fortunes and Fresh Starts painted in peeling letters above it. Normally, I'd never even think about going into a place like that, but something about the day had worn down my usual skepticism, and I felt this strange pull, an urge to just walk in and see if maybe, just maybe, there was something there that could help me turn things around. Inside, the shop was dimly lit and filled with the scent of old books and incense, the walls lined with shelves of odd trinkets, crystals, and dusty bottles. A woman with piercing green eyes sat behind the counter, looking up at me with a knowing smile as though she'd been expecting me. "Bad day?" she asked, her voice soft yet oddly compelling, and I found myself nodding before I could stop myself. She motioned for me to sit, and before I knew it, she was spreading out a set of tarot cards, her eyes narrowing as she studied them intently. "You've got a lot of negative energy surrounding you," she murmured, flipping over one card after another, and the more she spoke, the more I felt this strange tingling sensation, like something deep inside me was shifting. When she finished, she looked at me with a seriousness that sent chills down my spine. "Today, you have the chance to turn everything around, but it won't be easy," she said, handing me a small glass vial filled with a murky liquid. "Drink this at the end of the day, and everything you need to know will be revealed." I almost laughed, ready to brush her off as some kind of scam artist, but something in her eyes kept me from walking away. I took the vial, thanking her awkwardly, and headed back to work, trying to shake off the bizarre encounter. The rest of the day was just as terrible as I'd expected. My boss scolded me in front of everyone for the missing file, my coworkers avoided me, and by lunchtime, I was ready to break down. But every time I thought about leaving, I felt the weight of that vial in my pocket, a strange reminder that I had one last option, no matter how ridiculous it seemed. As the day finally ended, I found myself alone in the office, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead as I sat at my desk, staring at the vial. I felt stupid, part of me convinced it was nothing but colored water, yet another part of me felt that tingling again, stronger than ever. Without letting myself think too much, I uncorked it and took a sip, expecting some terrible taste, but to my surprise, it was almost sweet, like honey with a hint of something herbal. Almost instantly, I felt a rush of warmth spread through me, a strange sensation that was both comforting and exhilarating. And then, as I sat there, I began to notice something odd. Everything around me seemed sharper, more vivid, as though a veil had been lifted. My senses felt heightened, my thoughts clearer, and I realized with a shock that the weight of the day's frustrations had melted away, leaving me feeling lighter than I had in years. That's when I noticed the whispers, faint but unmistakable, like a dozen voices murmuring just out of earshot. I stood up, looking around, but the office was empty. The whispers grew louder, their tones soothing and encouraging, and as I listened, I felt a surge of confidence, a conviction that I could handle anything. I made my way out of the office, the world seeming to shift around me, the lights flickering as I walked down the hallway. By the time I reached the street, everything looked different, almost surreal, as though I were seeing it all for the first time. People passed by with friendly smiles, nodding at me as though they knew me, and I felt an odd kinship with everyone I saw. The whispers guided me, their words filling me with a sense of purpose, and I found myself walking to places I'd never been, meeting people who felt like old friends. Each encounter left me feeling more alive, more connected, and I realized that the darkness of the morning had been completely replaced by this strange, exhilarating light. But as the night wore on, the whispers grew more insistent, urging me to take risks, to push boundaries, to explore places I'd never considered before. I found myself in unfamiliar neighborhoods, alleys that seemed to twist and shift around me, the buildings looming higher than they should. The more I walked, the more I felt myself changing, shedding layers of fear and doubt, until I no longer recognized the person I'd been that morning. By the time I returned home, I was a different person, filled with a power I couldn't fully understand, and as I looked in the mirror, I barely recognized the face staring back at me. It was me, and yet Something more, something that had been unlocked by the woman's potion, by the whispers that still lingered in my mind. I thought about returning to her shop, asking her what she'd done, but deep down, I knew the answer. I'd been given a gift, a chance to turn my life around, and all it had taken was one bad day, one leap of faith, and a mysterious vial. As I lay down to sleep, the whispers faded, leaving me in a silence that was both peaceful and charged with possibility. And though I knew I'd never be the same, I welcomed the change, ready to face whatever the next day would bring. Sister-in-law tells my kids I'm not their real parent. It was supposed to be a simple family gathering, a chance to reconnect and enjoy each other's company, but it turned into a nightmare I never saw coming. It started with the kids playing happily in the yard while I grilled burgers and my husband set up the patio for our guests. My sister-in-law, Emily, arrived late, as usual, and immediately began making snide comments about the food and decorations. I brushed it off because I wanted to enjoy the day and keep the peace for my children's sake. The day went on, laughter echoing through the backyard, and everything felt normal until dessert time, when the conversation took a dark turn. I had just cut up a big bowl of strawberries when I overheard Emily talking to my kids, Jamie and Sophie. Curiosity piqued, I leaned closer, pretending to busy myself with the dessert table while eavesdropping. You know, you don't have to listen to everything your mom says. She's not really your mom, I heard her say, her voice casual yet filled with a condescending undertone. My heart sank. What do you mean? Jamie asked, confusion etching his young face. Well, she didn't give birth to you, did she? She adopted you, Emily explained, leaning closer to them, and I felt the anger rise in my chest. I couldn't let this continue. My kids were too young to understand this kind of conversation. Emily, what are you doing? I interrupted, stepping in front of her and the kids, my voice shaking with anger. I was just explaining to them some facts about their family, she said, feigning innocence. This is not the time or place for this. They're just kids, I snapped, my heart racing. Jamie's wide eyes were locked on me, and Sophie looked confused, glancing between us. I'm just trying to help them understand where they come from, Emily said with a dismissive wave of her hand. They need to know that their real family is the one that gave birth to them. That is not your place to say, I shot back, trying to maintain my composure. They know they're adopted. We've talked about it. They don't need you to create doubt in their minds. Oh, come on. It's the truth, she insisted, her tone dripping with sarcasm. My kids were standing there, clearly confused, and I felt my heart breaking as I watched them process the words Emily had thrown at them. Mom, am I not your real son? Jamie asked, his voice trembling, and I felt a wave of devastation wash over me. No, sweetheart, you are my son. You are every bit my son. We love you, and that's what makes us a family, I reassured him, kneeling down to their level, but I could see the uncertainty in their eyes. But Aunt Emily said. He started, and I quickly cut him off, turning my full attention to him. Aunt Emily is wrong. Family is about love and care, not just blood. You are my son, and nothing can change that. I felt Emily's smug gaze piercing through me, her smirk infuriating. You're just trying to make yourself feel better, but kids deserve to know the truth, she said, her words laced with judgment. What truth? That you want to undermine everything we've built as a family. I replied, my anger boiling over. If you can't be supportive and respectful of our family dynamics, then I don't want you around my children. Emily crossed her arms defiantly, her expression hardening. Fine. I'll leave, but you're only hurting them by lying to them about their origins. As she stormed away, I felt a mix of relief and anger. I turned back to my kids, wrapping them in my arms. I'm so sorry you had to hear that, I whispered, holding them tightly. Mom, why did she say those things? Sophie asked, tears welling in her eyes. Because some people don't understand that family is about love, not just blood. You are my kids, and that will never change, I assured them, but doubt lingered in the air. After that day, things felt different. My sister-in-law became a ghost at family gatherings, and the silence between us was deafening. I spent countless nights worrying about the impact her words had on Jamie and Sophie. They seemed fine, but I could tell that something had shifted in their perception of our family. Every time they asked about their adoption, I was careful with my words, trying to instill a sense of pride and security while also deflecting the negativity Emily had introduced. As the weeks passed, I realized that my kids were still processing the whole situation. They would occasionally ask me if I was their real mom, and I would reassure them time and again, but the pain of that day lingered. I knew I had to confront Emily again, not just for my sake, but for the well-being of my children. I reached out to her, suggesting we meet for coffee. I wanted to clear the air, but deep down, I was bracing myself for another confrontation. When we sat down, the tension was palpable. I took a deep breath, knowing this had to be addressed. "Emily, we need to talk about what happened at the barbecue," I began, my voice steady. "Your words hurt my kids, and that's not okay." She rolled her eyes, dismissing my feelings. They needed to know the truth. "But it's not your place to decide how they learn about their adoption. I'm their mother, and I will explain things to them in my own time," I said, trying to keep my cool. "You can't just throw that information at them like it's nothing." She huffed, crossing her arms defensively. "I was only being honest." "It's not my fault you can't handle the truth." "You're not being honest, you're being cruel. Family is about love, and that's what we've built." "You are tearing that down with your words," I replied, feeling my voice shake with emotion. She stared at me, her expression hardening as she processed my words. "You think you're better than me just because you adopted them," she spat. "That's not what this is about." I shot back. "This is about your choice to undermine my authority and my love for them. If you can't respect our family, then I can't have you around them." As the conversation continued, I felt a mix of anger and sadness wash over me. I never wanted to be in this position, but I also couldn't allow Emily to hurt my children any further. I left the coffee shop feeling drained but empowered. I was determined to protect my kids from any further negativity. Over the next few weeks, I continued to reinforce their sense of belonging, encouraging open conversations about their feelings. "Mom, do you think Aunt Emily is right?" Jamie asked one night as we read together. I paused, searching for the right words. "Emily is wrong about many things, and she doesn't understand what family really means. You are my kids, and I love you more than anything. No one can take that away from us." They nodded, but the doubt still lingered in their eyes. I knew this would take time to heal, but I refused to let Emily's comments define our family. I made sure to create a safe space for my children, where they could express their fears and uncertainties. It was challenging, but with each passing day, I saw their confidence grow. Then, one day, Emily showed up at our house unannounced. My heart raced as I opened the door, unsure of what she wanted. "Can we talk?" she asked, her tone more subdued than usual. I hesitated but eventually nodded, leading her to the living room. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened," she started, her eyes darting around the room. "And I realized maybe I crossed a line. I wasn't expecting that." "What do you mean?" I asked, curious but cautious. "I didn't mean to hurt your kids, I just thought they should know the truth about their origins, but I see now that I went about it all wrong," she admitted, looking genuinely remorseful. "I want to apologize for how I handled it." I felt a flicker of hope. "I appreciate that, Emily. It's important for us to communicate openly, especially when it comes to the kids. They deserve to feel safe and loved." She nodded, and for the first time, I felt like we were on the same page. "I really do care about them," she said quietly. "I just didn't know how to express that. Family is complicated, but the most important thing is love. We can work through this together if you're willing to try," I replied, feeling a sense of relief wash over me. We spent the rest of the afternoon talking, sharing stories about our childhoods and our hopes for our children's futures. As she left, I felt a sense of closure. I knew this wouldn't be the end of our challenges, but I was hopeful we could navigate them as a family. In the following months, I focused on strengthening the bond with my kids and rebuilding trust in their relationship with Emily. We took family trips, participated in activities together, and even had game nights with my sister-in-law. It was a long road, but I was determined to ensure my children knew that love was what made a family. Through all the ups and downs, we emerged stronger, and I felt grateful for the lessons learned. I realized that the love we shared as a family would always triumph over negativity and doubt. In the end, I witnessed a crazy proposal, here's the drama that unfolded. I witnessed a crazy proposal, here's the drama that unfolded. It all started innocently enough, just another weekend dinner out with my friends at this new trendy rooftop restaurant that had just opened downtown. The place had been buzzing with people ever since it opened, with a stunning view of the skyline, live music, and a relaxed but chic vibe that just made you feel like you were a part of something special. We managed to snag a reservation on the terrace, right by the railing where you could see the city lights spread out for miles, and I was just settling into my chair when I noticed a group at the table beside us. They seemed like a fun bunch at first, and I couldn't help but notice one guy in particular who kept glancing at this woman across from him with a sort of anxious but excited expression. You know the look, like he was building up to something big. And that's when I realized, with a thrill of second-hand excitement, that this guy was probably about to propose. My friends noticed it too, and we exchanged looks, giggling quietly and half pretending not to watch as he started to reach under the table, fumbling around like he was searching for something. We all knew what was coming, or at least, we thought we did. The whole terrace seemed to hold its breath as he finally pulled out this small, black velvet box, took a deep, shaky breath, and got down on one knee. The girl gasped, her hands flying to her mouth, and for a split second, it was like we were all suspended in this magical, movie-perfect moment. But then, just as he opened the box and said her name, this other woman, sitting at a nearby table, let out this strangled, almost guttural scream. Heads turned, including the girl who was just about to be proposed to, her face shifting from surprised delight to sheer horror as she looked at this other woman. And before any of us could figure out what was going on, the woman had stormed up to them, pointing a shaking finger at the guy on his knee and yelling, "What the hell are you doing, Brandon? Who is this?" A collective gasp went through the terrace as Brandon's face went white, and he stumbled back to his feet, looking like he'd just seen a ghost. His would-be fiancée looked utterly lost, her smile melting away, and she turned to Brandon, whispering, "Brandon, who is she?" It was then that we all started to piece it together. The woman who had interrupted was his girlfriend, his actual girlfriend, and apparently, he'd been secretly seeing this other girl on the side. The way she screamed at him, her voice shaking with betrayal and rage, made it clear she had no idea he'd been leading a double life. By this point, the whole restaurant was watching, the music had stopped, and every eye was locked onto this unfolding nightmare. Brandon, caught between two women, seemed completely paralyzed, like a deer in headlights, mumbling something about how he'd meant to break it off, but hadn't gotten around to it. The girl he'd just proposed to looked like her whole world had just shattered. She kept whispering, "Is this true?" over and over, almost to herself, while the other woman, his actual girlfriend, stood there with this fierce look of betrayal, demanding answers. And then, just when we thought it couldn't get any crazier, the girlfriend reached over, grabbed the ring out of the box, and hurled it over the railing with this furious scream. The ring flew through the air, a little glint of silver against the night sky, and we all watched as it plummeted down into the street below, disappearing from sight. That's when the yelling started in earnest. The girl who had just been proposed to began sobbing, tears streaming down her face, and she demanded that Brandon tell her why he would do this, why he would go so far as to propose while leading this double life. Brandon looked utterly defeated, his eyes darting around as if searching for an escape route, but his girlfriend wasn't letting him off the hook. She kept pressing him, her voice breaking as she told him she'd thought he was the one, that they'd been planning a life together. Her voice cracked as she asked him why he would betray her like this, especially in such a public, humiliating way. People around us were murmuring, some gasping, others pulling out their phones to record the whole thing, whispering in shock about how they'd never seen anything like it. But the heartbreak and raw emotion pouring out of these three people, right in the middle of this glamorous rooftop restaurant, was something that no camera could fully capture. At one point, the girl he'd proposed to let out this strangled laugh, wiping her tears and saying, "I thought you were the love of my life. I thought this was the happiest day of my life." The other woman scoffed, crossing her arms and saying, "Join the club." It was brutal, the way they both seemed to turn on him, united in their hurt and betrayal, while Brandon stood there, completely silent, looking like he wanted to melt into the floor. The girl he'd proposed to finally turned on her heel, storming out of the restaurant with tears streaming down her face. As she left, the entire terrace erupted in shocked whispers, a low buzz of disbelief and fascination as people tried to process what they'd just witnessed. But the drama wasn't over yet. The girlfriend, who was still standing there, shot Brandon one last look of disgust and told him she never wanted to see him again, then turned and walked away, leaving him alone in front of the crowd that had witnessed his entire life fall apart in a matter of minutes. Brandon just stood there, staring at the spot where both women had disappeared, looking like he couldn't quite believe what had just happened. The restaurant staff were staring, some looking embarrassed, others looking like they couldn't wait to gossip about this later. The rest of us, myself included, felt like we'd just been part of some twisted, real-life soap opera that no one had seen coming. I remember looking around, seeing all the shocked faces, the quiet murmurs as people tried to wrap their heads around the betrayal, the heartbreak, and the sheer audacity of what Brandon had tried to pull off. It was the kind of thing you hear about in stories, but to see it play out right in front of us was something else entirely. As Brandon finally slinked away, leaving the restaurant with his head hanging low, the staff quickly tried to get the music back on, to reset the mood, but the energy was all wrong. My friends and I couldn't stop talking about it the rest of the night, dissecting every look, every word, replaying the shocking moment when that ring had flown over the edge. It was a proposal gone wrong in the worst possible way, and even now, thinking back on it, I'm still in disbelief that we got to witness the drama unfold so unexpectedly. The crazy part. We didn't even get our food yet when all of this went down, but by the time our appetizers arrived, we were too caught up in the gossip to even care. My experience with a scary stranger, what I learned. I didn't expect to have an encounter like that, especially in the middle of a normal, uneventful evening. It started with me just trying to take a walk after work. I was feeling a little stressed, nothing out of the ordinary, just trying to clear my head, get some fresh air. It was a quiet neighborhood, the kind where you don't really expect anything unusual to happen. The houses were all well kept, and the street lamps flickered like they always did, casting long shadows along the sidewalks. Everything was calm, almost too calm. I was halfway through my walk when I noticed him. At first, I thought he was just another person out for a stroll. He was a tall man, wearing a long, dark coat, even though it wasn't particularly cold outside. His face was partially hidden by the collar of the coat, and he seemed to be walking in the same direction as me. I didn't think much of it at first. People walk in the same direction all the time, right? But then I realized something odd. He wasn't just walking at a normal pace like me, he was moving with purpose, staying just far enough behind me that it didn't seem like he was trying to pass, but close enough that I couldn't shake the feeling he was following me. I quickened my pace, hoping to outdistance him, but when I did, so did he. It was subtle at first, almost imperceptible, but the more I tried to walk faster, the more he matched my stride. That's when my anxiety kicked in. I tried to tell myself I was being paranoid, that maybe he was just heading the same way and it was all just coincidence. But the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. My heart started racing, and my hands felt clammy. I glanced over my shoulder just enough to catch a glimpse of his face, and that's when I saw it. He wasn't looking straight ahead like a normal person would, his eyes were locked on me, and he wasn't trying to hide it. He was staring, and it wasn't just a casual glance, no, this was intense, almost predatory. I felt a chill run down my spine. I tried to shake it off and told myself I was just overreacting. But then he spoke. His voice was low, almost a whisper, but it was enough to send a shiver through my entire body. "You should be careful," he said. His words weren't threatening exactly, but there was something about the tone that made it clear he wasn't just making small talk. It was as if he knew something I didn't, like he was warning me, but not in a way that made me feel safe. More like he was hinting at something far darker. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice shaking despite my best efforts to sound calm. I felt stupid the moment the words left my mouth. Why was I even engaging with this guy? But it was too late now. "You never know what's out there," he replied cryptically. "It's dangerous to walk around alone at night. There's a lot you don't see." I froze in my tracks. My brain was screaming at me to just turn around and go home, but my legs wouldn't move. I wanted to ask him what he meant, what exactly he was referring to, but something told me I didn't want to know. He took a step closer, and my heart nearly stopped. "You've heard the stories, haven't you?" he said. I wanted to say no, to lie and pretend I had no idea what he was talking about, but I couldn't. I'd heard the rumors, the whispers of strange things happening in the area, of people disappearing, of unexplainable events that made the hair on the back of your neck stand up. But I never thought any of it was true. Not really. "What stories?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He smirked, an unsettling expression that made my stomach turn. People go missing around here. You're lucky to be out so late. You might not make it home if you keep walking this way. He didn't move any closer, but I could feel the tension in the air, thick and suffocating. His presence was overwhelming, and I felt like the world around me had gone still. I couldn't see anyone else around, and the streetlights, which should have made me feel safe, only added to the sense of isolation. The wind had picked up, but the trees didn't sway. It was like the whole world had gone quiet, holding its breath. "What do you want from me?" I asked, my voice finally gaining a bit of strength, though it wavered with fear. "Nothing," he said simply. "I just want you to understand. There's no going back once you walk too far down this road. It's better to just turn around and go home. Trust me." My instincts were screaming at me to run, to get as far away from this guy as possible, but I couldn't move. My feet were rooted to the spot, and all I could do was stare at him, unable to tear my eyes away. I didn't know what to do, what was real and what wasn't. He took another step closer, and this time I noticed something that sent a jolt of fear through me. His coat, which had looked normal at first, was somehow wrong. There were long, dark stains on it that I hadn't noticed before, and they looked fresh. Almost like blood. "You should have listened," he said, almost sadly, as if I had disappointed him. "Now it's too late." That's when I snapped. I turned and bolted. I didn't look back, I didn't need to. My mind was focused on one thing, getting away from him. I ran as fast as I could, my lungs burning, my heart pounding. I could hear his footsteps behind me, but I didn't dare turn around. I couldn't let myself slow down. The feeling of his presence, his eyes on my back, kept me running, kept me pushing through the exhaustion and the fear. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I made it to a busier street, where the sounds of traffic and people reassured me. I stopped, panting, my chest heaving with the effort. I glanced over my shoulder, but he was gone. I couldn't see him anywhere. My mind raced, trying to process everything that had happened. Had it all been in my head? Had I imagined the whole thing? I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still out there, watching me. I don't know if I'll ever really understand what happened that night. All I know is that I'll never forget the way he looked at me, the way he spoke, and the way his words stuck with me long after I'd left him behind. I don't walk alone at night anymore, not in that neighborhood, and I've learned to trust my gut when something feels off. I don't know if what that man said was true, but something about the way he spoke, about the way he looked at me, made me believe that there was more to this world than we're willing to admit. Sometimes, the scariest part isn't the encounter itself, but the way it leaves you questioning what's real. Entitled parent demands my life savings for their kid's college fund. I never thought I'd find myself in a situation like this. My name is Jake, and I'm in my late 20s. For years, I've worked hard, saving every penny I could for my future. I've always believed in the value of hard work and financial independence. Growing up, my parents instilled in me the importance of saving and planning for the future. I was proud of my small savings account, meticulously built over time, which represented my dreams of home ownership and financial security. Everything changed when I met an entitled parent at a community event. It was a warm Saturday afternoon, and I was enjoying the local farmer's market, browsing stalls and sampling fresh produce. That's when I struck up a conversation with Lisa, a mother who was proudly boasting about her kids. She had an infectious energy about her, and I initially found her enthusiasm endearing. As we chatted, she told me all about her daughter, who was starting college soon. I admired her dedication to her children's education, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something off about her attitude. She casually mentioned how she was struggling to cover the tuition fees. I offered my sympathy, thinking how hard it must be to manage finances with kids in college. Little did I know, that small talk would lead to a nightmare. A few days later, I received a text from Lisa, out of the blue. It was a simple message asking if I had a moment to chat. I didn't think much of it at first, after all, we had shared a pleasant conversation. I agreed to meet her at the local cafe. As I walked in, Lisa was already there, sitting at a table with an eager smile. We exchanged pleasantries, but soon the conversation took a turn. "Jake," she said, her tone shifting to something more serious, "I really need your help." My heart sank. I had a feeling I knew where this was going. Lisa went on to explain that her daughter's college tuition was due soon, and despite her best efforts, she just couldn't cover it all. "I know you have a decent amount saved up," she said, leaning closer. "I was hoping you could lend me some money to help her out. It would mean the world to me." I felt my stomach drop. "Lisa, I don't think I can do that. I've been saving for a home, and it's really all I have." The look on her face turned from hope to disbelief. "But you're in a good place financially." "It's just money, Jake. It's for my daughter's future." I shook my head, feeling cornered. "I'm sorry, but I really can't. It's not that simple." The conversation escalated as she pressed me further. "You're being selfish. If you really cared about education, you'd help us out. You have the means, and this could change my daughter's life." I felt the walls closing in. "It's not about being selfish. It's my savings. I worked hard for this." Lisa's demeanor shifted. She was no longer the enthusiastic mother I had met. She was angry now, a different side of her, that I hadn't seen. "You can't let your selfishness stand in the way of my child's future. Think about it. You have no idea what it's like to struggle." I left the cafe feeling violated and angry. Over the next few days, I tried to forget about our encounter, but Lisa's words echoed in my mind. It felt like emotional manipulation. The pressure to help her was mounting, but I knew I couldn't give in. A week later, I received another message from Lisa, this time more aggressive. "Jake, my daughter is counting on you. If you don't help us, we'll lose everything." My heart raced with anxiety. I decided I had to find out more about her situation. I reached out to a few mutual friends, trying to piece together the truth behind Lisa's claims. What I discovered shocked me. It turned out that Lisa had a history of being entitled and manipulative. She had constantly relied on others to bail her out of financial problems and had a reputation for making unrealistic demands. I felt a surge of anger mixed with relief. I wasn't alone in feeling that something wasn't right. Armed with this knowledge, I felt ready to confront her. The next time I saw Lisa was at a neighborhood barbecue. She approached me with her usual smile, but I could see the tension behind it. "Jake, have you thought more about helping out?" she asked sweetly. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. "Lisa, I've heard some things, and I want to be clear. I can't help you." Her expression shifted instantly to one of fury. "You think you're better than us? You're nothing but a self-righteous prick." Her outburst drew the attention of others at the barbecue. I stood my ground. "I'm just trying to protect myself. You can't expect everyone to cater to your demands." The confrontation became heated, and Lisa's face twisted in rage as she shouted accusations about my character. "You're going to regret this, Jake. I'll make sure everyone knows what you really are." I felt a chill run down my spine. The weight of her threats hung in the air. After that day, the situation escalated further. Lisa began spreading rumors about me in our community, painting me as greedy and uncaring. I started to feel isolated, watching as friends I once trusted began to pull away. The anxiety of the situation gnawed at me, and I knew I had to take action. I considered reporting her behavior, but part of me hesitated, unsure if it would make things worse. Then, one evening, I received a text from an unknown number. "Jake, we need to talk. Meet me at the old park after dark." My heart raced at the thought. Was it Lisa? I had no choice but to confront this once and for all. As night fell, I made my way to the park, my mind racing with possibilities. I arrived to find Lisa waiting, her figure illuminated by the dim light of a nearby lamp. "You're brave, I'll give you that," she sneered as I approached. "But you've made a big mistake." I stood tall, refusing to let fear consume me. "I'm not scared of you, Lisa. I know what you've been doing, and I won't let you manipulate me anymore." Her smile twisted into something sinister. "You don't understand the lengths I'm willing to go to protect my family." In that moment, I realized how deep her entitlement ran. She was a force to be reckoned with, someone who believed the world owed her something. I felt the need to protect myself and my reputation. I pulled out my phone, ready to document this encounter. "You're not going to get away with this, Lisa. I'll make sure everyone knows the truth." Her expression faltered for a moment, but then her anger returned. "You think you can intimidate me with that little phone? You have no idea who you're dealing with." The tension between us crackled like electricity, and I realized that I was finally standing my ground. You're not going to manipulate me anymore. I'm done. I turned to leave, my heart racing with adrenaline, but before I could take a step, she lunged at me, grabbing my arm. You think you can walk away? You'll regret this. I jerked my arm away and hurried out of the park, my mind racing. I knew I had to take a stand. The next day, I reached out to some of the friends who had distanced themselves and shared the truth about Lisa's behavior. To my surprise, many of them had seen through her facade, and they were willing to stand by me. I organized a small gathering, inviting everyone who had been affected by Lisa's actions. We shared stories and experiences, realizing how far she had manipulated people. Empowered by the support of my friends, I decided to confront Lisa publicly. At the next community meeting, I stood up and recounted my experience, detailing how she had pressured me and spread lies about me. As I spoke, I could see heads nodding in agreement, and the atmosphere shifted. Lisa's face turned crimson with anger, and she tried to interrupt, but the crowd hushed her. I realized then that I wasn't alone in this fight. When the meeting ended, people began coming up to me, expressing their support and sharing similar stories about Lisa's entitlement. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. No longer was I the target, I was part of a collective voice against her manipulation. Lisa, on the other hand, was now the one on the outskirts, isolated and angry. The final straw came a few weeks later when Lisa tried to approach me again, her demeanor more subdued. Jake, I think we can work something out, she said, desperation in her eyes. Let's just put this behind us. I looked her dead in the eye, my voice steady. You had your chance, Lisa. You can't keep using people to get what you want. I'm not afraid of you anymore. I turned away, feeling a sense of empowerment wash over me. The experience had changed me, forcing me to confront not just Lisa but my own fears. I realized that entitlement could manifest in many ways, and sometimes, standing up for yourself was the only way to reclaim your life. As I walked away, I couldn't help but feel grateful for the support I had found in my community. I had learned valuable lessons about boundaries, entitlement, and the power of standing your ground. While Lisa's story was still far from over, I knew that I had taken a stand for myself, and in doing so, I had inspired others to do the same. It's a reminder to always be cautious about whom to trust and to stand firm against those who seek to exploit kindness. The time I tried to be a hero and it backfired. The time I tried to be a hero and it backfired. When I say I tried to be a hero, I don't mean the superhero, save the world type. I'm just your average person, someone who gets freaked out if I hear footsteps behind me in a dark alley or see a shadow move where it shouldn't. But that one night, I guess I wanted to step up, prove to myself that I wasn't some coward. It started as a regular Tuesday evening. I'd just gotten out of work and was taking the long way home to clear my head. I work at this tiny, dead-end office that feels more like a dungeon than a job, and I'd been wanting to shake up my life, do something that made me feel, I don't know, alive? So there I was, walking through the park, thinking about everything wrong with my life when I heard a faint scream echoing from a distance. At first, I tried to ignore it. Screams can be anything, right? Maybe someone saw a rat, or it was a couple messing around. But then I heard it again, sharper, filled with unmistakable fear, and it sent a shiver down my spine. I knew I should have just kept walking, called the cops, or even run in the opposite direction, but something inside me stirred. I wanted to help, to feel like I mattered, like I could be the one to make a difference, just this once. I followed the sound, my heart pounding harder with each step, and found myself weaving through the trees, each step crunching the gravel beneath me like an alarm telling me to turn back. It was dark, the kind of darkness that presses in on you, and the park lights barely reached the spot where the scream had come from. As I got closer, I spotted a figure, no, two figures, struggling in the shadows near the edge of a secluded path. I could barely make out what was happening, but it looked like someone was trying to pull away from the grip of a much larger man. Instinct kicked in, and before I could even think about the consequences, I shouted, "Hey! Let her go!" The man's head snapped in my direction, and the look he gave me froze me in place. His eyes were wild, filled with something dark, something dangerous, and for a second, I regretted every decision that had led me here. But then, the woman screamed again, desperate, pleading, and I couldn't just stand there like a deer in headlights. I lunged forward, grabbing the nearest thing I could find, a broken tree branch lying on the ground, and swung it at him. My aim was off, and he barely stumbled, but it was enough to get him to let go of her for a split second. She took off running, and for a moment, I felt this surge of triumph, like I was really making a difference. I'd actually saved someone. But that feeling was short-lived. Before I knew it, the guy turned his attention on me, and he was fast. Faster than I'd anticipated. He grabbed me by the collar and slammed me against the tree with a force that made my vision blur. "You just had to play the hero, didn't you?" He sneered, his voice low and filled with venom. I tried to struggle, but he had me pinned, his grip like iron, and I realized just how powerless I was in that moment. The adrenaline that had pushed me to act had vanished, leaving me with nothing but a sickening fear clawing at my insides. He leaned in close, his face barely inches from mine, and I could feel his hot, rancid breath against my cheek. "You should have walked away," he hissed, and I knew then that I was in real trouble. Panic took over, and I tried to fight, kicking, thrashing, doing anything to break free, but it was useless. He was too strong, too determined to make me pay for interfering. And then, just as I thought it was over, something strange happened. He released me. Just let go, like he'd lost interest. I stumbled back, gasping, clutching at my chest as I watched him walk away without another word. Relief flooded over me, mixed with confusion, but I wasn't about to question it. I turned and bolted, my legs moving faster than they ever had before. When I got home, I locked every door and window, telling myself I'd dodged a bullet. I wanted to believe it was over, that I'd never see him again, but deep down, I knew that wasn't true. For days, I felt like I was being watched. I'd catch glimpses of movement out of the corner of my eye, shadows lurking where they shouldn't be. At first, I chalked it up to paranoia, maybe I was just shaken up. But then I started finding things out of place around my apartment. Small things at first, like my keys being somewhere I knew I hadn't left them or the front door being unlocked when I was sure I'd bolted it. One night, I even heard footsteps in the hallway outside my bedroom. I told myself it was just my imagination, but the unease kept growing, gnawing at me. And then, one night, I woke up to find a message scrawled on my bathroom mirror in what looked like red lipstick: "You should have stayed out of it." My blood ran cold. I knew it had to be him, the man from the park, but how had he gotten into my apartment? The locks were still in place, the windows sealed tight. I called the police, but they didn't find any signs of forced entry and dismissed it as a prank. I tried to convince myself they were right, that it was all in my head, but the fear wouldn't go away. A few nights later, I woke up to the sound of someone breathing right next to me. I froze, my body paralyzed with fear, and I forced myself to open my eyes, praying it was just a nightmare. But it wasn't. There he was, standing at the foot of my bed, staring down at me with that same twisted look in his eyes. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. I was trapped in my own body, forced to watch as he leaned closer, a sick smile spreading across his face. "You thought you could play hero," he whispered, his voice dripping with malice. "But heroes always pay the price." Then he was gone, just like that, leaving me alone in the dark, trembling, my heart racing so fast I thought it might burst. I don't remember how long I sat there, staring at the spot where he'd been, too afraid to move. All I know is that something in me snapped that night. I couldn't keep living like this, in constant fear, waiting for him to come back. I decided to confront him, to put an end to this once and for all. I started searching the city, going back to the park, retracing my steps, hoping to find some clue, anything that could lead me to him. Days turned into weeks, and every night, I'd return home exhausted, only to find more signs that he'd been there. More messages on the mirror, my belongings rearranged, my nightmares bleeding into reality. I became obsessed, barely sleeping, barely eating, just driven by this need to make him stop, to get my life back. And then, one night, I found him. Or rather, he found me. I was walking down an empty street, my senses on high alert, when I felt a presence behind me. I didn't even have to turn around to know it was him. "You're really making this too easy," he said, his voice sending chills down my spine. I spun around, fists clenched, ready to fight, but he just laughed, a low, mocking sound that echoed down the street. "You should have left it alone," he said, his eyes gleaming with something sinister. "But you wanted to be a hero. Now you get to live with the consequences." And just like that, he disappeared into the shadows, leaving me standing there, shaking, defeated. I went home that night, feeling more helpless than ever, realizing that he was right. I had tried to be a hero, tried to make a difference, and now I was paying the price. My life would never be the same. When I discovered my partner's hidden talent, a surprise. When I discovered my partner's hidden talent, a surprise was one of those moments you only read about in books or see in movies, the kind of thing you never actually think will happen to you. My partner, Ben, had always been quiet and somewhat reserved, the type of person who preferred to stay in the background at parties, content to listen rather than talk, and while he was a kind, funny, and incredibly supportive partner, he'd never given me any reason to think he was hiding something extraordinary. We'd been together for 3 years, living in a small, cozy apartment that suited us just fine, a life filled with routines that were comfortable and predictable, which was exactly how I thought we both liked it. Ben was an accountant by day, a creature of habit who'd rather spend an evening watching reruns of sitcoms on the couch than going out on some wild adventure. So, imagine my shock when, during a casual evening at home, I stumbled upon something that turned my entire understanding of him upside down. It happened completely by accident. I was cleaning out the closet while he was out running errands, looking for an old photo album I hadn't seen in a while, when my hand brushed against a dusty, nondescript box tucked away in the far corner. It was one of those old wooden boxes with intricate carvings on the lid, something that looked too old to belong to Ben, who I'd never known to have a sentimental attachment to anything other than his favorite coffee mug. Curious, I pulled it out, wiping away years of dust, and pried it open, half expecting to find some forgotten trinket or maybe an old journal. Instead, what I found left me speechless. Inside was a small stack of photographs, not of Ben or his family but of stunningly realistic paintings, each one more breathtaking than the last. They were of landscapes, cities, people, some smiling, some looking wistful, each one imbued with a life and emotion that seemed to leap off the paper. I thought at first that maybe he'd bought these or collected them somehow, but something about the way the box was hidden, the careful way they were arranged, told me these paintings were more than just a collection. Beneath the photographs was a small sketchbook, the pages filled with quick, meticulous sketches of everything from animals to bustling city streets, each one done with such precision that it was like peering into a frozen moment in time. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of it, and that's when I saw it, a small, folded note tucked into the back of the box, with the words to remember scrawled across the front in Ben's familiar handwriting. My heart pounded as I unfolded it, feeling as though I was intruding on something deeply personal, but my curiosity had completely taken over. The note was short, barely more than a few lines, but it hit me like a punch. It read, "To remember who I was before I became who I am. To remember the part of me I had to leave behind." I sat there, staring at the note, feeling a strange mixture of confusion and awe. Who was this person I'd been living with for 3 years, and what was this hidden life he'd left behind? That evening, when Ben returned home, I couldn't keep it to myself. I held up the box, feeling my hands shake slightly, and asked him point blank, "Ben, what is this?" He froze, his face draining of color as he looked from the box to me, a flicker of something unrecognizable in his eyes. For a moment, he looked like he was about to deny everything, but then he let out a sigh, running a hand through his hair, and sat down on the edge of the bed, motioning for me to join him. What he told me was a story I could have never expected. As it turned out, before he met me, before he settled into the life I thought was all he'd ever known, Ben had been an artist, a serious, passionate artist who had once dreamed of making a living from his paintings. He'd spent years studying, honing his skills, pouring everything he had into his art, and for a while, he'd even been on the verge of his big break. But life, as it often does, had other plans. Just as he was gaining recognition, he'd been hit with a series of personal setbacks, family issues, financial troubles, things that had pulled him away from his dream, forcing him to find a stable job, to grow up and leave his art behind. He kept it hidden, he said, because he didn't want me to see him as a failure, as someone who'd given up on his dreams, and he didn't want to open that part of himself again. But now, as he spoke, I could see something in his eyes, a spark, a flicker of the passion he'd buried for so long, and I felt a swell of something indescribable, a mix of love, admiration, and a strange sadness for the person he'd been and the dreams he'd left behind. After that night, something shifted between us. I encouraged him, gently, to pick up a paintbrush again, to try creating just for himself, no pressure, no expectations. At first, he resisted, claiming he was too rusty, that he'd lost whatever talent he once had, but I could see the way his fingers itched whenever he looked at a blank canvas. So, one day, I surprised him with a set of paints and brushes, leaving them on the kitchen table with a note that simply said, "For the artist in you." It took a few days, but one evening, I came home to find him sitting at the table, paintbrush in hand, a half-finished landscape spread out before him. He looked up at me, his face a mixture of nerves and excitement, and I knew in that moment that the person I'd known for 3 years was just one part of him, and now I was meeting another, deeper part that he'd hidden away. Over the next few weeks, he began to paint more and more, each canvas revealing a different piece of his soul, a side of him I'd never seen. The more he painted, the more he opened up, telling me stories of his past, of the years he'd spent chasing his dream, of the sacrifices he'd made, the things he'd lost along the way. Watching him rediscover his talent was like witnessing a transformation, a rebirth of sorts, and I felt honored to be a part of it, to see him come alive in a way I'd never seen before. Eventually, he started sharing his work online, hesitant at first, but as the positive feedback poured in, I saw his confidence grow, that old spark reignited, brighter than ever. One night, he showed me a message from an art gallery interested in his work, and the look on his face was one of pure disbelief, like he couldn't quite accept that his talent, his passion, had found its way back into his life. That night, as we celebrated with a bottle of wine and talked about the future, I realized that our relationship had deepened in a way I'd never thought possible. I hadn't just discovered his hidden talent, I'd uncovered a part of his soul, a piece of him he'd kept locked away, and in doing so, I felt like I'd fallen in love with him all over again, this time with a new understanding, a new appreciation for the person he truly was, both the man I'd known and the artist he'd become once more. The day I found a lost wallet, what happened next? I never thought finding a lost wallet would lead me to something so strange, so eerie, so utterly bizarre. It was just an ordinary Tuesday morning when it happened. I was walking down the street on my way to work, lost in thought, barely paying attention to my surroundings, when something on the sidewalk caught my eye. It wasn't much, just a small, leather wallet lying half open in the gutter. Most people would have walked right by it, probably assuming it belonged to someone else or was just another lost item with no real significance. But something about it seemed different. I don't know what drew me to it, maybe it was the odd way it was positioned or the fact that there was something inside it that caught the light in a strange way. I knelt down and picked it up, and for a moment, everything seemed still. It was a simple black leather wallet, the kind that could belong to anyone. There were no obvious signs of wear or damage, so it didn't look like it had been there long. I flipped it open, expecting to find a few bills or some loose change. But instead, I found something that made my heart skip a beat, several old, faded photos. The kind of photos you'd find in a time capsule, or tucked away in an attic for decades. They looked ancient, yellowed with age, yet the images were strangely clear. One photo was of a woman, probably in her early 20s, standing in front of a house I didn't recognize. The other was of a group of people gathered around a table at a party, but their faces were blurred, like the photo had been taken in a hurry. The third photo was the strangest, a picture of what appeared to be a child, maybe 10 years old, with dark eyes staring directly into the camera. But there was something about the child's face that felt off, as if it wasn't quite right. I couldn't explain it. It wasn't a bad picture, there was no obvious flaw in it, but the child's expression, the way their eyes were so intense, it sent a chill down my spine. I didn't understand it. Why would someone keep these photos in their wallet? Who were these people? And why were they hidden away in a place like this? My curiosity got the better of me, and I started digging further into the wallet. Inside, there was a small slip of paper with a name and an address. The handwriting was messy, almost hurried, but I could still make out the words, "The Old House on Maple Street, 3 p.m. Come alone." My mind raced. What did this mean? Was this some sort of prank? I thought about throwing the wallet back into the gutter and walking away, but something made me hesitate. I had this gut feeling that I couldn't ignore, like I had just stumbled onto something important, something that I was meant to find. But then again, I was no fool. I knew better than to get involved in something that felt off. I was just an ordinary person going about my day, and this could be nothing more than a coincidence. But that nagging feeling wouldn't go away. I kept the wallet in my hand as I walked the rest of the way to work, barely able to focus on anything. The images in the wallet played in my mind over and over again, especially the child's face. Who were they? Why did they look so familiar? I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd seen those eyes before, though I couldn't place where or when. By the time I got to work, I had made up my mind. I wasn't going to let it go. I had to know more about this wallet, the people in the photos, and what that cryptic message meant. After a quick lunch, I found myself standing in front of the house on Maple Street. I couldn't explain it, but it felt like I was being pulled there, like I had no other choice but to follow the instructions on that slip of paper. The house was old, run down, and clearly abandoned. It had a kind of unsettling stillness to it, the kind of place that feels like it holds secrets, just waiting for someone to uncover them. I stood in front of the gate for a long time, just staring at the house, wondering if I was making a huge mistake. But curiosity had already taken over, and I found myself walking up the cracked path leading to the front door. I hesitated for a moment before knocking. There was no response. I knocked again, a little harder this time. Still nothing. I almost turned to leave when I heard it, a faint sound from behind the door. It was the faintest whisper, like someone was calling my name. I froze. My heart raced, and I couldn't tell if I was scared or excited. My hand shook as I turned the doorknob. The door creaked open, revealing a dark hallway with peeling wallpaper and dusty furniture. It looked like the house hadn't been touched in years. I stepped inside, my footsteps echoing in the silence. The air smelled musty, stale, as if no one had breathed in it for a long time. I looked around, trying to make sense of it all. Everything in the house was in disarray, as if someone had left in a hurry and never returned. I felt an odd sense of dread creeping up my spine. It wasn't just the house that felt off, it was something in the air, something that made my skin crawl. As I moved deeper into the house, I heard the sound again. This time, it was louder, clearer, and unmistakable. It was a child's laugh. It echoed through the walls, a high-pitched, eerie giggle that sent a chill through my bones. I wanted to turn around, run out of the house, but my feet were rooted to the spot. Something kept me there, something drawing me further in. I followed the sound of the laugh, which seemed to come from the upstairs. Slowly, cautiously, I climbed the creaky stairs, my heart pounding with every step. When I reached the top, I saw a door slightly ajar, a dim light spilling out from the crack. The child's laugh was louder now, almost deafening. I didn't know what I expected to find when I opened the door, but it wasn't what I saw. Inside, there was nothing but a small, dusty room filled with old toys and broken furniture. In the center of the room, sitting on the floor, was a figure. A child. The same child from the photo. But they weren't like any child I'd ever seen. Their skin was pale, their eyes dark and hollow. Their gaze locked onto mine, unblinking, as if they had been waiting for me. I stood there, frozen, unable to move. The child smiled at me, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was wide, unsettling, almost too wide for their face. The giggle I'd been hearing earlier echoed in the room, but now it was louder, as if it was coming from all around me. I didn't know what to do. I wanted to run, but my body wouldn't obey. The child's smile grew even wider, their eyes widening to an unnatural size, and I felt the air grow heavier, the room closing in around me. "You shouldn't have come here," the child whispered in a voice that didn't belong to someone so young. "Now, it's too late." Suddenly, the room grew cold, the temperature dropping so fast that I could see my breath in the air. I staggered backward, my heart racing in my chest. The last thing I remember was the child's eyes following me as I turned and ran, stumbling down the stairs, the giggles echoing behind me like a haunting melody. I don't know how I made it out of that house. I don't know why I was drawn there in the first place. But I haven't been able to shake the feeling that I'm being watched ever since. The wallet is gone now, no trace of it anywhere, but the memories linger, haunting me. And every time I close my eyes, I see that child's smile. I know what I found that day was no accident. That wallet wasn't lost. It was waiting for me. My friend's partner made a pass at me. Should I tell them? It all started on a seemingly normal Saturday evening, when my friend Mia invited me over for a small get-together. Mia and I had been best friends since childhood, navigating the ups and downs of life together. She had recently started dating a guy named Tom, who seemed charming and funny at first. I hadn't known him for long, but he quickly integrated himself into our friend group, and I wanted to be supportive. As the night unfolded, laughter filled the room. Mia and Tom were cozy on the couch, and the rest of us were enjoying snacks and drinks. Everything felt light and fun, but something shifted when the two of them stepped outside for a moment, leaving me alone in the living room with Tom's friend, Mark. Mark had always been friendly, but there was a tension in the air that night. After a couple of drinks, he leaned in closer to me, his breath warm against my ear as he whispered, "You know, I've always thought you were really attractive." My heart raced, unsure how to respond. I chuckled awkwardly, brushing it off as a drunken compliment. But as the night went on, Mark's comments became bolder. "You'd be a lot more fun to hang out with than Mia," he said, flashing a grin that made my skin crawl. I tried to laugh it off, but I felt a knot forming in my stomach. When Mia returned, I desperately wanted to confide in her, but I hesitated. What if she didn't believe me? What if it ruined their relationship? As the evening progressed, I kept a close eye on Mark, who continued to make subtle advances. He touched my arm lightly when he spoke, and at one point, he even leaned in to kiss my cheek, his lips lingering a bit too long. I felt frozen in that moment, torn between loyalty to my friend and the unsettling realization that I was being pursued by her partner's friend. I spent the rest of the evening trying to act normal, but I could feel the weight of Mark's gaze on me. Every time I caught his eye, my heart would race, and I could feel my palms sweat. I wanted to leave but didn't want to hurt Mia's feelings or cause a scene. As the night drew to a close, I finally mustered the courage to confront Mark. "You should really stop flirting with me," I said firmly, my voice shaking slightly. He laughed it off, acting as if I was overreacting, which only made me more uneasy. After everyone had left, I stayed behind to help Mia clean up. As we sorted through empty bottles and plates, I felt a wave of guilt wash over me. Should I tell her what had happened? I imagined how she might react. Would she think I was lying or just trying to stir up drama? Mia and I had always promised to be honest with each other, but this felt different. I had never wanted to come between her and someone she cared about, especially not for something like this. That night, I hardly slept. I tossed and turned, replaying every moment in my head, questioning if I should reach out to Mia or keep my mouth shut. The next few days dragged on as I grappled with the situation. I started distancing myself from Mark, avoiding gatherings where he might be present. But each time I saw Mia, I felt the guilt creep back in. Finally, after a week of internal turmoil, I decided to confide in my best friend. We met at our favorite cafe, and I felt a mix of dread and relief as I sat across from her. I hesitated, unsure of how to start. "Mia, can we talk about something?" I said, my voice trembling slightly. She looked at me curiously, sensing my unease. "Of course, what's wrong?" I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of my words. "It's about Tom's friend, Mark." Mia's expression shifted slightly, her eyes narrowing. "What about him?" I recounted everything that had happened that night, the compliments, the lingering touches, the way I felt uncomfortable. As I spoke, I watched her face transform from confusion to disbelief. "Are you serious? He did that?" she asked, her voice rising slightly. I nodded, tears welling in my eyes. "I didn't want to tell you because I didn't want to cause problems, but I can't keep it to myself anymore." Mia's hands trembled as she processed what I was saying. "I can't believe this," she said, shaking her head. "I thought he was different." I felt a mix of relief and fear wash over me. Relief that I had finally told her, but fear of how she would react. Would she confront Mark? Would it damage their relationship? What should I do? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Mia looked determined. "You deserve to feel safe around my boyfriend's friends, and I'm going to talk to him about this." My heart sank a little, knowing that it could create tension between them. "Are you sure?" I asked hesitantly. "I don't want to cause drama." "This isn't drama," she replied fiercely. "This is about respect. I can't let someone treat my friends like that." I felt a rush of gratitude for her support, but deep down, I feared how Tom might react. Mia promised to have a conversation with him that evening. I left the cafe feeling a strange mix of hope and dread. That night, I received a text from Mia. "I talked to Tom. He's going to confront Mark. I'll let you know what happens." I felt a weight lift off my shoulders, but a gnawing anxiety settled in its place. Would Mark deny it? Would he retaliate against me for saying something? I spent the night anxiously awaiting her update, wondering how it would all play out. The next day, Mia called me, her voice shaky. "Hey, can we meet up again? I need to talk to you." My heart raced as I agreed, fearing the worst. When I arrived, I could see she had been crying. "What happened?" I asked, panic rising in my chest. "Tom confronted Mark, and it didn't go well," she admitted, wiping her eyes. "Mark denied everything and accused me of being jealous. He said I was just trying to break them up." I felt a surge of anger for her, knowing how unfair it was. "That's ridiculous. You're not jealous, you're protecting yourself and your friends." Mia nodded, clearly hurt. "But Tom is caught in the middle. He doesn't know what to believe." As we talked, I felt an overwhelming urge to take responsibility for what had happened. "Maybe I should reach out to Tom," I suggested. "I can tell him what Mark said and how uncomfortable I felt." "Are you sure?" Mia asked, concern etched on her face. "I don't want you to feel pressured." I took a deep breath, determined to take action. "I need to be honest with him, for both of our sakes." That evening, I texted Tom, asking if we could talk. He replied almost immediately, agreeing to meet. As I walked into the coffee shop, my heart raced. When I saw Tom, he looked tense. "Hey," he said, offering a weak smile. "I've been hearing some things." I nodded, trying to keep my voice steady. "I just wanted to clear the air about Mark. He made me uncomfortable at the party, and I feel like it's important you know what happened." As I recounted my experience, Tom's expression shifted from confusion to disbelief. "I can't believe he did that," he said, shaking his head. "I'm sorry you had to go through this." I felt a mix of relief and anxiety as we talked. Tom listened, validating my feelings and expressing anger towards Mark's behavior. "I'll talk to him again," he said, determination in his voice. I left feeling hopeful that we were on the same page, but I still feared the fallout. In the following days, the tension in our friend group was palpable. Mark tried to brush off what happened, acting as if it were a joke, but it was clear that trust had been broken. Mia and Tom had to reevaluate their relationship with him, and it strained their dynamic. As the weeks went by, I learned how difficult it can be to navigate friendships and relationships when lines get blurred. Eventually, Tom decided to cut ties with Mark, realizing that his behavior was unacceptable. Mia supported him wholeheartedly, and I felt a mix of relief and guilt for how everything unfolded. I knew that I had done the right thing by speaking up, but it came at a cost. I still worried about how Mark would react if he found out I had spoken to Tom. But as time went on, Mia and Tom grew stronger, their bond solidified by the challenges they faced together. And I felt grateful to have friends who valued honesty and respect above all else. So, my advice to anyone in a similar situation: speak up. It's never easy, but your feelings matter, and standing up for yourself can lead to a healthier, more honest environment. Sometimes, you have to take risks to protect the ones you love, and in the end, it's worth it.